All right, let's actually get started. So just to let folks know too, Alice has shared that we are going to be recording the work group conversations as well. So she has the recording button on. And then we're going to try to use the chat box as little as possible, just because we're small, would just prompt people to actually, because we're really small, don't even know if you need to use the raise the hand feature. But if others, I think there should be roughly 8 of us. So as others join, if it becomes easier to raise your hand, but to actually try to auditorially capture our conversation. So I am Kim Buckheit. I am the new, policy, communications and engagement manager at MCSS, recently transitioned over from MSDE. So Tia and I had the opportunity to work together there a little bit. So excited to join your group, and I'm going to be facilitating our conversation this morning. And I'll let Alice introduce herself, and she's going to help be our note taker today. Alice.
Hi, I'm Alice Rose. Some of you have already seen me in some meetings. I'm communications specialist with MCSS. I'm glad to be with you, and I am recording and I am taking notes. So good to see everyone today.
Thank you, Alice. How about Dr. McKinnon? Would you like to go next?
Sure. I'm Dr. Tia McKinnon. I am Director for Special Education at Charles County Public Schools. I'm new to the board advisory board, and I'm happy to be here.
Okay, we're happy to have you. Laurel Moody.
Good morning. I'm Laurel Moody. I'm currently a professor at Stevenson University in their nursing program, but I'm in this group because I am the liaison for PMAC. That's at MIMS, the Pediatric Emergency Medical Advisory Board, representing the Maryland State Department of Ed and the Maryland Department of Health in that MIMS group. Happy to be here. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for joining us. Megan Berger.
Good morning, everyone. I'm an attorney at Disability Rights Maryland. We're the state's protection and advocacy agency.
Thank you for being here. And Mr. Albin?
Yeah. Hi, my name is Tom Albin. I work for the Archdiocese of Baltimore. I am, my position or title is Director of Risk Management. So I do a lot of different things here, both with our parish schools and also support Associated Catholic Charities.
Great, thank you. And so actually I only can see 4 people on my tiles right now. So do we have anybody else with us that I'm not seeing?
Hi, Kim.
There they are. Oh, thank you for undoing that, Alice. Hi, actually, Dr. Hoover, I can actually see you now. Go ahead.
Hi, everybody. Sharon Hoover. I'm a professor at the University of Maryland School of Medicine in the Division of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, and I co-direct the National Center for School Mental Health.
Hey, thanks for being with us. And Mr. Deschanel, I don't know.
Yes, I'm Senator Klaus Meyer's legislative director. She's actually out of state at the moment. So here I am. I'm happy to be here.
And actually, could you do your name, please, so I make sure I get it right, Sam?
Yeah, Deschanel.
Deschanel, got it.
Yes.
Thank you. All right, so we are here as a group to talk about 3.1. So Alice, it's okay for you to put that note page back up. And I have, so as we are looking at kind of the work for all 3 groups, it is very possible and probably most likely that this goes into 2 sessions, that it ends up taking us roughly 2 hours to do this work. Our goal really today is to, so Alice, if you can scroll up just a little bit so we can kind of get a big capture of actually the other way, sorry, scroll down. So really today's kind of objective is for us to complete, go back. So guiding prompt 1. So guiding prompt 1, what we're going to start by is really identifying kind of the words and phrases that are inside of the recommendation and observation standpoint that need to be more clearly defined. Okay, so that we're all kind of talking about the same thing as we have this conversation. So we're going to identify those words that need to have some definitions, and then we're actually going to work to define them. And I'll help kind of guide us in some things as we look to define some terms. And then the guiding prompt 3 is for us to also look at kind of the concern statement. I call it concern statement, but that observation statement that was developed by the advisory group, and just kind of go a little deeper into that statement too. So if we can, in our next hour, get 1, 2, and 3 done, we will, I think, be in a great space to then, in maybe the next session, start to really look at kind of some strategies and action steps, okay? So that being said, if you can scroll back to the statements, Alice, thank you. So again, this work, so for those who are new, this work was done previously by the advisory work group, identifying recommendation and observation statements. So scroll up a tiny bit more for them to be able to read the recommendation statement. So develop, expand informational materials and training to educate stakeholders, including students, staff, parents, communities, on identifying behaviors of concern. These resources should incorporate student voice. And then the observation statement, which is where I've kind of, when I use the word concern statement, there's a need for more support to identify behaviors of concern, de-escalate, provide resource to re-engage, strengthen school, community, students, parents, staff relationships, thereby creating a culture of civility. So let's just, what terms? So from your standpoint, what are some words, phrases, terms that have been used here that we need to make sure we define, so we're all talking the same thing?
Well, this is Tom, and the one thing I would just note, the part that talks about identifying behaviors of concern, I just think it would be important, particularly, I feel like such a lay person with the group of people I'm on here with. So, but as a lay person, you know, my first question would be, is this focused on identifying behaviors of concern? Would that be both for self-harm as well as harming others? Or are we really focused on one or the other or both? That would be my big question or clarification.
Yep, and I think that's great. So one of the things that I'm going to make sure the group, and I'll try to hold you to this, is I want, as we think about our audience for any of the work that we're doing, it is a wide scope. So individuals who are educators, mental health professionals, parents, right, grandmas and grandpas, that we always have to be mindful that our stakeholders group aren't familiar with the acronyms. I will tell you, joining MCSS, that's been something I've like, I don't know what that abbreviation means. And know that from our education side on the shop, we use terms too. So what I hear, Tom, is further clarifying, defining behaviors of concern, what that is.
Thank you.
Yeah. Others. Go ahead,
Kim,
Laurel.
this is Laurel. Going along with what Tom was expressing, I think the culture of civility, I think those of us on the committee hopefully understand that, but I'm not sure our parents and other stakeholders understand what that means.
Thank you, Laurel. Others.
I think if our audience is broad, then we probably want to define what we mean by de-escalate situations and even re-engage. I mean, I think we probably think about it as re-engage them effectively in the learning environment and, you know, with their peers, et cetera. But to a layperson, that may not be clear what we mean by re-engage. I mean, you could argue that we need to define everything, right?
Every word, I know.
What do we mean by strengthening school, you know, relationships? But I think that defining culture of civility may attend to that.
Other thoughts? So so from the recommendation statement, informational materials, when you all have thought about those, what was the, I guess, thinking? So what is an informational material?
It's Laurel. I think whatever strategies are developed have to sort of be, is it multimodal? I mean, I think we have to look at various, whether it's, you know, a handout, a flyer, a video, a PSA. I mean, I think, you know, our experience, especially with this new generation of students, we've got to look at a variety of styles and strategies to provide that information.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then student voice. So what does student voice mean to all of you? Do you all have the same thinking around that term? Question mark. Literally, I ask questions, and honestly, sometimes I'll put like, it's not that I have the answer. I'm actually legitimately asking that. Go ahead, Megan. Were you going to say something?
Yeah, I mean, I think ideally it would be wonderful to have, you know, a student in this group, and I know that's not necessarily possible, but I think as we have these discussions and as the resources are developed, trying to pull in, you know, students who this, you know, this impacts the most, to sort of have them share their thoughts, and make their recommendations stronger.
Mm-hmm. And can I just follow up on that, Megan? When you think about this, is it the students' perspective in terms of what's developed by the group, or on the front end with regard to what are the behaviors of concern, and or both?
Both.
Okay. Okay.
And Kim, if I could just add one other thing, going back to the informational material, my understanding has always been there'd be two types, if you will. That is what I would consider like self-standing or self-contained informational material, things directed to the audience that talk in terms of signs and things to look for. But then also the other resource would be providing them where they could go for help, professional help. You know, so.
Great. Other thoughts? Go ahead. Yep.
Additionally, this is Tia, Dr. McKinnon speaking. With the informational materials, and I was thinking back to when you said the audience is a wide scope, then, you know, calling out and making sure these materials are accessible.
Yep. So
and by
Tia,
accessibility, I mean able to be interpreted by various audiences, not just their ability to obtain them, but their ability to gain information from the text that we use.
Great.
I wanted to add one more thought in terms of including student voice. I think we, you know, at least my organization has received calls from students and families where they have felt sort of unfairly targeted by the threat assessment process. And so I think that perspective, you know, should be included as well, because I think there are some students who feel, you know, like they're going to be unfairly targeted or disproportionately targeted for this type of thing.
So that makes me also think, Megan, then is there voice beyond just students that's perhaps underrepresented? So parent voice, or, I mean, which voices are more likely to be heard, respected, right, versus other voices?
I wish there was a way, and I don't know how this is done. It seems like it's maybe unsurmountable, but if we could get parent voice from parents that are not likely to engage in this information, like how do we reach them? What's the best forum? What kind of information would they seriously react to? I mean, I think it would take, you know, some work on the part of the individual schools to identify, you know, I'm thinking about parents that either, you know, don't have internet access, don't have computers, don't look at email. You know we have parents that don't respond to documentation that comes home. You know, how could we engage the less engaged parents? Does that make sense?
Totally. Right. And I would apply exactly that thinking to students, right? Like
Right.
there are some students that we go to consistently, right? And get the voice of the perspective of maybe the traditional type of student, you know, and underrepresent maybe that equity of voice from the more marginalized student or the student who's truly struggled, right? In some of these instances. Yeah. So that equity, right? The equity of voice across a host of different ways. Yeah. All right. Anything else under this like terms? So you did a good job not starting to go into definition, although some of our conversation probably started to take us a little bit that way. But let's go ahead and move on to the kind of second prompt where let's just start kind of defining. And so one of the things as we talk through like defining these elements is we need to first make sure we're not defining something that's already been defined within our Maryland law regulations or other things, right? We don't want to create a definition that is contrary to some other definition and creates confusion. So part of what we need to make sure, so let's work on one at a time. And then if we know an existing definition is there, we need to be able to look at that definition, say, does it apply to what we're talking about, right? Does the definition apply to this context of student behavior or not? And if we don't see, right, if there isn't an existing definition, then we need to create some. This is just really important. And so just my perspective kind of crossing into the MCSS land is there are a host of terms that aren't well defined, that are creating some kind of confusion across different stakeholder groups. An easy example is the word drill, right? I thought everybody knew kind of when we talk about school safety drills, but in reality, that's not necessarily the case, like what that actually looks like. So something I think as a center, we're going to actually do a little more about. All right, so which ones do you want to start with? Where do you want to start?
Civility is a good one.
Okay, so do we want to do civility as a word or do you want to do culture of civility as a phrase?
I like culture of civility.
Okay, got it. All right, so let's attack culture of civility. Do you think it exists anywhere in reg or law? I'll do some quick Google searching for you guys as you talk or think. I mean, it's not something that popped to me as being in Maryland reg anywhere, but. Go ahead. So how about go back to where this phrase came from? Kate told me there had been some conversation that the work group or the advisory group had kind of worked through this phrase, how you got there.
So I think some of the definitions that that readily come out are things like respectful and courteous interactions. I think safe somewhere belongs in there. Mm-hmm. Respectful and courteous interactions. That seems to be the most popular words coming up.
Okay.
And respect is a popular word from my perspective in this. I feel like it's very ambiguous. And maybe if we could further define respect as actions that are culturally sensitive, or I don't know. It's defining
Acceptable.
because it's different for everybody.
Right.
I just
think
placed a paper in the chat from, I think it was 2020, on a focus on civility with public school educators and students. And they do have a section defining civility. I don't think it's perfect by any stretch, because it does use the term respect, which I agree leaves a lot of room for interpretation. And unfortunately, you know, in ways that are really, I think, quite biased culturally. So, but it does give kind of a bit of background on what we mean by civility in public education. And it talks about behaviors that show respect toward a person in order to maintain social harmony or recognize the humanity of that person. That's how it's defined by one group. And they also talk about civil discourse, you know, that the characteristics of civil discourse are that they're exchanges that are robust, honest, frank, and constructive. So there's a few different ways that it's defined here.
Mm-hmm.
And here's another definition that it's within the same document. You know, knowledge, attitudes, values, habits, and behaviors that are central to maintaining a healthy, diverse, and dynamic society. And that it's based in the belief that all human beings are of equal moral worth. So there are some definitions that already exist. But they then break it down into kind of some specific behaviors. So that could be helpful for us to, like, you know, here's behaviors in a classroom or in a school that would exemplify civility, like awareness of needs of others, responding appropriately to those needs. You know, they have several. But again, these leave room for interpretation as I'm looking at some of them, like dressing and grooming in ways that are appropriate for the schools. Well, that's, I think, been, you know, hotly debated.
I mean, I think there are still a few behaviors or specifics that we could put down as, you know, what is included in a culture of civility. Like, you know, I'm thinking of, you know, when they're debating on the Senate floor in the legislature, they always you know, you have to allow people, you don't interrupt people when they're in the middle of, you know, making a thought. Like, that's a pretty safe thing to include in what's in culture of civility, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Kim, would you mind scrolling up when you have time, I wanted to see the context of the language that we're, the culture of civility, the context.
Yep.
that-
So
I
Alice,
can pull it up too, sorry.
no, you're good too. So Alice, could you actually, decrease the size of the document just a tiny bit? I see I always do this. I put my cursor there. Thanks, Alice. So just a tiny bit more, decrease, and then scroll. So I think Megan wants to, that's good. I can still see. So Megan wants to be able to see the prompt above on the initial. Yep. Keep going. There you go.
Right there.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I'll pull it up too, so we don't have to keep scrolling back up. Thank you.
One thing that I would say, just as we define this, that would be important is that civility is for all people in the school building. I think sometimes people hear like civil behavior and they start coming up with a list of what students should do that is considered civil behavior, but it really is kind of a multi-directional process of civility, including the adults in the building.
Yeah, I mean, I love that thinking, Dr. Huber, and I guess thinking about from whose perspective, right? Is it civil and what is the purpose, right? So is the behavior one that we desire because it allows the others to be, and others maybe adults to be more comfortable, right? When, you know, yeah, there's a lot wrapped inside of that concept. All right, I'm going to allow you a little space to think and resonate here. Ideally, we could narrow some of this thinking into a few statements, perhaps. And you don't, again, like we don't have to totally finalize a definition here, but in a ideal scenario, we would have a little bit of a draft of something that, again, could be proposed to the larger group, right? But also then really helps to drive the conversation as we go forward too. So Alice, go ahead and scroll back down under the guiding prompt 1. Yep, or guiding prompt 2. Yep, right where you are there.
I really like the knowledge, attitude, and behavior, believing all human beings have worth.
So Alice, maybe one of the things, instead of rewriting, Alice, what if you highlight? Can you just like scroll over that part and just highlight what Megan, the part that Megan has?
All right, I was, excuse me, too, building off that and like beginning it with the showing regard for others' knowledge, attitude, and behavior.
Mhm.
Okay, good. Other thoughts? And Alice, I'm actually in the notes document, so I can help a little bit too on some of these while they think and talk out loud.
Is it okay if we move on to other terms to be defined, or are we?
Yeah, we can. How about we spend like 1 more minute here? Any other final thoughts on this one?
The only thing that I'll say is like, it looks like in the note taking, understandably, because we're all kind of speaking quickly, but like some of the phrases have like been combined in ways that they were like, I would just maybe look at the link document if like the knowledge, attitude, and behaviors was really about civility being like knowledge, attitudes, behaviors, habits that are central to maintaining a healthy, diverse, and dynamic society. So it's I think it was connected to another sentence about human beings have worth. And I just want to make sure that like we're not mixing sentences together there. And maybe, you know, if we use some of those, we would cite it, but we don't have to do that right now. I'm just saying maybe to go back at some point and just, if you scroll on down in that document, there's a section on the definition, but yeah, right here.
All right. So let's, we've got some stuff here that we'll continue to play with. So I hear maybe agreement on us spending a little more time, maybe either a couple of us together or creating some versions using some of this tools that we come back to. Sound okay? Okay. All right, Tom, which one do you want to go to next?
Just again, the behavior of concern.
Yep.
And I would just generally break it into 3 categories that I would say are important to include. And that is obviously behavior that's suggestive of self-harm, behavior that is suggestive of harm to others, or then, and I know this is going to open up a whole nother, how do you define that, but behaviors that are just generally disruptive, not necessarily targeted towards anyone, but you know, those students that post things out on, you know, social media or whatever that are distracting. So it looks like there may be behaviors of concern are defined.
Yeah, I just pulled up the statute. And so this is the way that the statute defines behaviors of concern.
Okay.
It defines it as these 3 things here.
Megan, did you put that in the chat box?
I did.
Oh,
see it.
sorry.
Got it.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I put it in the chat. Yeah.
Yep.
It's in the definition section.
Got it. So I'm just going to read out loud for the, again, the purpose of the recording. So behaviors of concern means behaviors or threats that indicate a student may pose a risk of self-harm or harm to others is 1. Number 2, behaviors of concerns include expressions of hopelessness, known drug use, suicidal gestures or statements, and known gang activity.
I'm assuming that means it's inclusive of those things, but not, so that's not a comprehensive list.
Right. And I guess the broad category, and again, I'm not suggesting we change it, but I do, you know, we at least where I get involved, we experience as many issues of, you know, concerning behaviors that really, I wouldn't say fall into self-harm or harm to others. It's just, you know, just disruptive type of behavior that's not necessarily, again, targeted towards anyone. This definition clearly, it has to be targeted, at least as I read that it's got to either be targeted self-harm or targeted to others. You know, so I don't know if that's worth trying to at least broaden the perspective we would have or stay within that which is already in state law, which, you know, that's whatever's decided.
Well, so talk about that question that Tom just posed from the standpoint of information materials, what you would be developing, creating. So is there value making the definition more expansive because the target audience would be, and the materials you would be developing would be more expansive? Question mark.
I think we have to be careful because I think we have to make sure we have sort of a full understanding of what labeling a student's behavior as a behavior of concern triggers in the law, because it triggers a behavioral threat assessment, which can have, you know, really serious impacts on the student's instruction and access to school, and it can be stigmatizing. And so I think being too broad risks, there are risks with it being too broad. So I think there can be informational materials about supporting students and re-engaging and de-escalating, but I think if we're trying to broaden specifically the behaviors of concern, which have a very sort of specific meaning in the law, I just think we have to be careful.
But that's a really helpful distinction, Megan, and I'm trying to understand then kind of what our charge is. Like,
right, me too.
Because I totally agree. If we start defining something that then by default would lead to a threat assessment, we wouldn't want to have it really broad, right? I mean, I think when I first heard behaviors of concern, I wasn't thinking about it in that way. I was thinking about it as, you know, things that you can do even upstream, like if a student's grade, you know, a behavior of concern might be that they, you know, they start attending school less, or that they have a sharp decline in grades, or that they're socially withdrawn, right? Or that they don't feel that they have connections in schools. Like those are all red flag warnings, but they wouldn't warrant a threat assessment. So what is our charge here?
So I would actually, so I think less about what is your charge. Do you want to not use that phrase? So when you inserted that phrase, so go back to your recommendation and observation statement, right? You built that phrase, or you built that using that term, behavior of concern. Now you understand that term or phrase has some context related to law. It's totally inside of the scope of your work if you want to make some minor changes to that recommendation observation statement. Right, to your point, Dr. Hoover, like maybe if you say concerning behaviors, right, or behaviors that interfere, right, do you change the initial language and not use the phrase behaviors of concern?
I think if it has a context within state law that means that it, you know, precipitates a threat assessment, that we should do away with that term, or that we need to stick very specifically to that term. I mean, my preference, just because I would wish for our charge to be kind of how do you move interventions upstream, and if it's really about promoting a culture of civility in the classroom, then I feel like there's a lot more that you would want to include within educational materials than just kind of what do you do if a student is at risk of self-harm, harm to others.
And I will just quickly add, in light of that definition, a lot of the behaviors I'm thinking about wouldn't necessarily trigger a threat assessment. It would just be more of a, for lack of better terms, a general disciplinary discussion with a student. But it wouldn't, in my mind. So yeah, I agree. We either, if we're going to use that term, stay within the limited confines of how it's defined, or if we want to go outside of that, that's a whole nother issue.
So Kim, your understanding is that we can change up.
Yes, it's more than my understanding. It's my kind of directive that I've made sure the other, because I kind of anticipated this would happen potentially, right? Is that it is okay, as you've now gone through what we're talking through, is want to change some phrases that you initially used. So you can. The only thing what Kate said was it would just mean that you would go back to the whole advisory group and say, we propose, right, a change in this observation recommendation, and for this purpose, right? They would just have to all agree to, you know, say yes.
Do you mind scrolling up to the top again, just to see what would be a possible shift? I mean, if others are on board with that idea of kind of adjusting the language to be more inclusive of behaviors that are concerning, instead of, so sorry, just all the way up to the actual recommendation.
Yep, keep going, Alice.
Yeah. So information material, educate stakeholders, identifying behaviors of concern.
Mm-hmm.
I don't feel like it sounds like it's not our job to identify behaviors of concern that would warrant a threat assessment. It's more our job to identify behaviors or situations that could be supported with additional educational materials to promote a culture of civility.
I would agree that really, and so anybody, correct me if I'm wrong, I really think where you guys were going was that you wanted to identify those behaviors that were going to interfere potentially, right, with the student's ability to learn, with the ability of an environment of school to be conducive to learning for others, I think where you were really going was identify behaviors that need to fall inside of your tiers of intervention, right? Or that need support and intervention to help a kid be able to be successful. That's where I think you were going, but you just kind of grabbed that phrase, right? Without, so.
Or need more investigation or probing to find out what's going on.
And I'm not sure who's note taking, but just to kind of restate, Kim, it's not just interfering with others' abilities to learn, it's also interfering with with the learning environment. Like, so it could interfere with their own learning, or others' access to learning.
Yeah, and I think it's important that you make sure that you're capturing both of those concepts, right? So, I mean, a student could be engaging in behaviors that still allow them to learn, but are interfering with what others, right? The environment, and or vice versa, might not interfere with the environment, but are interfering with their individual ability to capture or to learn. Yeah, and actually, Alice, you don't have to capture all of this right now as we talk through this piece, but so if we were going to, you, I'm not sure where I fit in this whole dynamic, which pronoun to use, what might that look like? Proposing that change to the recommendation. So let's first of all, is everybody in agreement that you don't want to use the term behavior of concern? Is there anybody opposed to that shift, that change? Okay. All right, so we're in agreement that we're going to strike the term behaviors of concern, and instead use, and then what do we want to instead insert there? So I'll read it again for those. So you have, so this is again your recommendation statement: develop or expand. So could also be develop and or expand. Informational materials and training to educate stakeholders, including students, staff, parents, communities, on
And is it just about identifying behaviors of concern, or is it about, I don't know if there's another group charged with this, but right, is it about like identifying and addressing, behaviors or sign? I mean, I guess behaviors is a safe word, but.
Yeah, I love that you're right, because it's really about responding, right? Okay. It's really about being able to respond to.
Or addressing, because you also may want like more proactive approaches that aren't just reactive and responsive, but kind of like proactively addressing. So addressing, identifying and addressing. And it's not just, I mean, in my mind, it's not just behaviors that interfere with learning, because it's also behaviors that could reflect, I'm not going to say this, but, behaviors that reflect like a distress and,
right. Unhealthy, right. Not well. Yeah. So what if it's just about behaviors that interfere with, and then you could, because I think where you're going, Dr. Hoover, it may not interfere with learning, but it may interfere with my overall well-being or my, you're talking about that whole child.
Would interfere with learning, but that's okay. What do others think?
No, I think you can, but you can use a word that is about wholeness, right? Whole child well-being, that ultimately, if it's interfering with my well-being, it's going to interfere more than likely at some point with my ability to learn, right? Mm-hmm. To access. because those are the things when we start talking about threat assessment, right? Why do I become involved in gang activity? Why do I engage in drug use, right? It's because of in general, some other unmet need.
So I'm going to ask another question and then I'm going to mute myself. But is it just about identifying and addressing problematic behaviors, or is it also about educating about behaviors that promote positive civil classroom environments? Like, there's a lot of, are we really focused on kind of like the problematic behaviors? And maybe we are.
I'll allow space for others there.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to remember. I think we're all having, a hard time remembering the discussion that, that brought this concern onto the table.
And I don't think so. I'll just chime in from, so those who know me, right, from my behaviorist background, it's not one or the other, right? Like, by creating a culture and climate that's conducive for positive learning and positive experiences, right, you're decreasing the likelihood of these things. So, you know what I mean? It's all part of which, for folks to say that this is just about school safety, right, and addressing problematic behavior, in reality, the way you address problematic behavior in a whole school, right, Tia and others, is by creating the culture and climate that allows for the positive and the inclusiveness of students. I know that doesn't necessarily help, but go ahead.
We could flip it and say, behaviors that interfere with a positive, so the language that you just said, sort of a positive learning environment for all students and staff. I don't know.
I think a term we use often is maladaptive behaviors instead of problematic.
So Tia, talk through that a little more. What are you're thinking?
The problematic, and I know we were trying to define something else, and now, finding something else that's a problem. But problematic behaviors is also ambiguous, and it depends on who the receiver or the consumer of the behaviors, whether they're problematic or not. So instead, we would use a term like maladaptive, the things that are getting in the way of whatever is supposed to be happening. So it's not that they're just getting in the way of what the student is supposed to be, child is supposed to be doing, as opposed to problematic.
So there's, right. So one option, I think what Tia is saying is that you would do something like this. Which I don't know if, right. So so right, is that what you were thinking, kind of, Tia? So it's like open in terms of you could define a maladaptive behavior in a host of ways, right? But you're kind of focusing on the element of just supporting that piece.
Right.
So that's one proposal that actually, right, becomes more open-ended, right? Bigger with that. The other that Megan had kind of just thrown out was actually, rather than phrasing this from the negative standpoint, phrasing it more from the positive, right? Which you totally could do, is that you develop, expand information materials training to educate on something about increasing pro-social behaviors that advance learning or something like that, right? Identify and
And could it be both? Could it be to, I like the way you just, to increase prosocial behaviors that, promote learning and decrease maladaptive behaviors that interfere with learning.
Mhm. Training to.
Because they're not one and the same, right? Like increasing
Right.
prosocial behaviors is not the same as decreasing maladaptive. But I do really like the idea of including the promotion of prosocial behaviors or the increase of prosocial behaviors so that we're not exclusively focused on how do you eliminate disruptive or maladaptive behaviors.
I agree, Dr. Hoover. I think that's.
Yeah, I would love that as part of my new job, right?
Yeah, I like that too.
All right. What about that? So actually, Alice, if you could scroll up to just the purple before she takes us out of our group.
So my only concern about some of the terms that we've recently included is how this is going to flesh out. And, it's probably premature, once again, to our stakeholder group, who will have no real understanding what some of these words mean.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we go back to the definition piece again, right? We have to define pro-social behavior now, and then maladaptive. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right, so before, again, we get kicked out, do you guys want to just hold on this? So I knew that we were going to go into, the work groups are going to end up being multiple sessions. Our experience is probably not shouldn't be any unique from the other two. Do you want to come back to this before we propose it to the larger group? Or do you want to get feedback from the larger group on this change in the recommendation?
I think getting feedback, I think, is important. It may help guide us a little bit closer to our goal.
Okay, go ahead, Tia.
If they're going to ask for the definitions of pro-social and maladaptive, we should wait until it's complete prior to getting feedback.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I have 2 votes for when we go back to, actually, I need somebody also, I didn't do this in the beginning, who's willing to be the share out person when we go back to the big group? So I need a volunteer to just very briefly, and you'll have the notes pages here, we'll project them for you, to just do a recap of the conversation with the bigger group.
I'm happy to.
Thank you, Dr. Hoover.
Sure. Just jump in, everybody, if I misstate something, or I'll be brief.
And if I could just add one observation, just again, listening to everything. I mean, I think the one thing we will be challenged on, because I know I'm sitting here thinking, this has, in my mind, exponentially expanded what would be the product. And I think, we may be pushed on, is it reasonable to start with something so broad in scope? I'm not saying we shouldn't. I just want to be prepared to say why it's more beneficial to start from a proactive, broader level than kind of isolating on those specific incidents of self-harm and harm to others, as was originally thrown out with the definition of the behaviors of concern.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, understood. So I think that then, which also kind of maybe speaks to getting a little bit of feedback from the group on this concept, right? To see what the others think about. Yep. All right, any final thoughts? So when we come back together as a work group, we'll we'll start by making sure, are there other terms that we need to define, right? If we come back to that, and then we'll make sure that we start to move into strategy piece somewhat. Okay, so know that we didn't really get to the part about talking about the observation statement, which is that kind of concern statement, right? And one of the things that I will guide you through in that, though, is really getting you to start thinking more, is the concern about all kids? Does it apply to a 4-year-old as well as a 18-year-old? Is it about particular groups of students, right? So to define that observation or concern statement a little more, and it could be that we just create bullet points inside of that, right? To make sure that as we develop informational materials, who is it that we're really looking to very specifically support, right? Is it all of Maryland? Is it a particular region, right? Is it a national problem? Is it a local problem, et cetera, et cetera? Okay, but so when we come back together, I will kind of help us work through that. Anything before we get ripped away from each other? All right, great conversation, everybody. Thank you for all of your contributions. And there we go. I look forward to our next one.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, I think we've got everybody moved to where they need to be. So hopefully everybody's here at our, this is the work group for 6.1, observation 6 on that list of recommendations. Again, my name is Ron Pierce. I'm training administrator here with the Maryland Center. With us also from Maryland Center, and I'll let them introduce themselves. How about that? We have our Deputy Director, Dino, are you on?
Yes, morning, folks. Ron, I'll monitor while driving into the office.
Gotcha. So our Deputy Director's there on his way in, and Britt.
Sure.
Say
My
hi.
name is Britt, and I am a regional intervention and prevention specialist. I cover Baltimore City, Baltimore County, Harford County, and Cecil County, and I will be your trusty note taker today. So bear with the spelling mistakes, please.
And Britt is going to be sharing the notes, so we're able to look at them as we're going along, and we're going to keep track, and we're going to report out on those later when we join the rest of the group at 11. Lee, you want to say hello to everybody?
Sorry. Good morning, everyone. Sorry, I was away from my desk for a minute.
Chief, I see you here as well. You want to say hello real quick? Tell us what organization you're with, the Chief, again.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Chief Kiefer, Hagerstown Police Department.
And I can't see, let's see, Dave Engel, you're with us. You want to say hello real quick? Tell us where you're from. Perhaps not. Kelly, can you say hi?
Good morning, Kelly Anderson, Coordinator of Psych Services, Anne Arundel County Public Schools.
Thank you. And Karen with St. Mary's.
Good morning, Karen Bailey. I am the chairperson of the Board of Education for St. Mary's County.
Thank you. And let's see, we have, I'm going to mess this name up. Matt Crisafulli.
You said it perfectly. Good morning, everyone. I'm Sheriff Matt Crisafulli, the Sheriff for Worcester County. I'm also the liaison for the Maryland Center for School Safety, for liaison for the Maryland Sheriff's Association, and also an alumni of Anne Arundel County Public Schools.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm an alumni from Montgomery County. Last but not least, Dr. Martirano, would you like to say hello real quick? Let us know what system you're from.
Good morning, everybody. Mike Martirano, Superintendent in Howard County.
Thank you, sir. So happens to be one of my counties in my region. I cover Howard, I cover Carroll, also assist with Baltimore and with Montgomery County. So we're still working.
Hey, Ron, it's Dave Engel. I was having some mic issues. Just wanted to say good morning to everybody.
Good morning, Dave. And your mic sounds good.
Great, thank you.
We are recording, by the way. Hopefully everybody got that message when they got into this group. That's just to capture our responses. There's some questions I'm going to ask in regard to this particular recommendation the advisory group made. Let's see if there's anything else I need to add here. We're going to try to keep time. I think my note taker is going to assist with that. And about 10:55, you're going to hear a broadcast message. We're all going to jump back over. So let me just get this started. In your package, there was a list. I mean, there was it was a list, but it was the recommendations that all of you came up with earlier this year. I think Britt has that up here. I'm going to go ahead and read the observation 6 that we're working on. We're going to be answering questions on. Basically says there are unrealistic expectations regarding what law enforcement and educators can do in response to social media threats or posts. So that's the concern. The recommendation is that develop guidance on the criminal administrative investigation and response to social media threats made against schools. This should include the development of a public infographic to explain the process from the identification of the threat through investigation and resolution. We're going to expand that to include swatting, which we just put an informational bulletin out on Friday. And we're also going to include written threats. So I know there's been a bunch of, just the last week, I've seen written bathroom wall kind of things, claiming there's going to be a threat or a shooting at a school. We're going to include, so we're just going to broaden this out a bit from social media threats to really any threat that's made public somehow. And swatting would be included in that. All right, so the first question we're going to pose to all of you, would love to hear your thoughts on this. So identify words and phrases from the recommendation statement, that's the second statement I gave you, that need to be clearly defined to eliminate confusion, assumptions, or miscommunication. So an example for that might be, let's see, what terms under the recommendation here would be potentially, well, like the word threat, for instance. What is that? What kind of potentially that has a number of meanings to different people? What would that be? What could we come up with a good working definition of that? And any other terms, what other terms do you think, I'm tossing that out when to get it started, but any other terms in that recommendation 6.1 you think we need to define better? And you can feel free to unmute, or the chat will be open. Let me go ahead and open that. I think Britt can probably monitor that as well if you prefer to type it in.
Ron, I'm going to go ahead and get started. It's Mike in Howard County. I'm going to parse the words from the recommendation and rearrange them to focus on my concern and by superintendents as well. Develop guidance on response to social media threats made against schools. I'm going to just focus in on that piece. To date, before Thanksgiving break, I've had 42 threats against my schools through swatting made through social media, through phone calls, and they are extremely disruptive to our community. That one led to a full-blown evacuation and a reunification. That none of those panned out to be credible, but at the same time, we have to take all of those as if they are credible threats. So the responsiveness for the need to develop guidance on how we respond to social media threats made against schools, I believe at times is still confusing to parents when it's activated in the heat of the moment with then young people sending out their own messages and identifying all the things that are happening at that time.
Okay, so what term and what, is there a term in that we need to work on better? We need to better define?
I think is guidance.
Guidance. Okay.
Yeah, the problem with guidance is going to be that it's based on each individual incident that's coming in. So as Dr. Martirano just mentioned, some are going to take it to the level at the most extreme, but a lot are going to be handled at a much lower level than that. So I think, from the guidance standpoint, in public safety, we look at an incident management response, and we develop that based on a scale. That scale can go as little as you need, and you ramp it up as much as you need. But it comes in as the information's coming in. So whatever's coming through social media, and we get our fair share up here in Washington County as well. It comes down to that that information being shared back and forth between the schools, the school board system, our director of security for the school system, and then law enforcement, to develop what that response is going to be. So I think from a guidance standpoint, we just need to keep it somewhat broad, but to give maybe some examples of to the parents to know that it's going to be on a case-by-case basis based on the information we have at the time. And if it's credible to the point of an evacuation of the school, then that's what it's going to be, whether it's found to be true or not. And that the safety of the students and the staff have to be at paramount. And unfortunately, in today's world, we're going to have to live with that. That's where I'm at with it. An incident management response is what we got to be looking at.
So you talked about having a rating scale. Do you have something specific that we can tag off of on how you rate?
Well, it comes down to the credibility of the threat. The threat is kind of vague. Pretty on between what the school knows, the temperature of the school knows what's going on. There are staff in the schools that have an ear of the students better than a lot of other places that are going to kind of know through that. And then what we know through our investigation techniques that we use very early on, we can determine whether this is very specific enough that we need to act directly to something specific like evacuating the school, a bomb threat. Let's use a bomb threat as an example. You have a bomb threat that just comes in generically. There's going to be a bomb goes off at school at 10 o'clock. And it comes in as a phone call. We have trained our staff up here in the schools probably close to 15 years ago to not panic on how they answer that phone call, but to start calmly asking questions and specifically asking what some details are. And you can quickly learn whether it's going to be a hoax or not based on the responses that are getting. That 10 o'clock bomb threat comes down to, again, can the teachers look at their classroom? When we first started getting these years ago, we would go in as a staff, as police staff, and walk through the schools looking for backpacks that might have bombs in them. We would know what belonged in those school classrooms, but the teachers would. So at that point, when that comes in, the teachers know, is something look out of place in their classroom or not, and you move on. You move from that. But from that bomb threat, based on the access to the schools, based on the development, let's say there was an activity at school over the weekend, and you find out that there was some possibility it was unsecured because of the activity, we take that threat more seriously than if the school's been shut down since Friday and no one's been in that school, that now all of a sudden there's going to be a bomb in the school at 10. Those are the kind of activities. It's a little hard to kind of pinpoint it down. I'm trying to come up with a really good example. But that's kind of where I'm leaning in terms of how we look at the investigation.
All right, thank you. So we're kind of bleeding over into the guiding prompt number 2. So we'll save some of these thoughts too. The prompt I have for that basically is to come up with a working definition. So we're working on guidance, and in the process of explaining it, we're also coming up with some definitions for it. So we'll try to hone that in the next step. Very quickly, any other besides the term guidance and what we're hoping to come up with here, is there another term in this recommendation that you believe we need to work on? Karen, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I have a couple thoughts. I'm not real, I don't know if I like the word guidance, but maybe I like the word protocol. And I'm going to take this, I understand you guys are all taking this from a law enforcement perspective, but to Dr. Martirano's points, we're dealing with the students and the parents and what's out there on social media. So if I'm a parent and I see on Facebook that there has been a threat overnight at one of my high schools or middle schools or any of my schools, I want to know what's happening right now. Right. I want to know, has the school, has the administration taken it? Is it go directly to the sheriff's department? Are they investigating? I want to know what these 5 steps are. Right. And then when they determine or, how long it's maybe a time frame or what they're working on. And then when they determine that the threat is no longer viable, that the parents are notified about it. Right. I mean, Dr. Martirano, I see you shaking your head. I mean, do you agree with that? I mean, because that's what we battle, because then, I mean, I understand the police are taking it on their side, but then it is just continually scrolling and people are sharing it over and over again on social media. And then you're creating this frenzy that it's hard then to tamp down if it was something. I mean, we had an incident where, it came from Texas, and it had absolutely no credibility at all. But I mean, it was like shared like 400 times. So that's what we're fighting. So I think maybe protocol that, these are the 7 steps that we go through. And before, we just look at it strictly from how we're going to investigate it from a law enforcement perspective. Dr. Martirano?
Yeah,
Yes,
absolutely. I'm shaking my head like almost like a bobblehead here. I agree completely with what you're saying. Let me just kind of expand what Ms. Bailey's talked about a little bit more in detail, that she's done a really good job of defining. When those come in, there is this level of uncertainty for us that we must take every one of those as credible. So the definition of credible continues to be something that I advance through the infancy of the development of a situation. How do we know it's not credible? How do we know it is credible? What's going on that identifies that? And we shouldn't be, as school system folk, put in a position to determine that. So the credibility is a major piece. The protocols are extremely important, because then I have to defend that with Board of Education members of how we made the decision to act versus not. We were actually criticized for overreacting to a situation that I said, on social media, you're gonna get that. But the protocols, although they come out in a very unique way and they're situational driven, protocols and credibility are extremely important for us when we're communicating to our community. And I always feel uncomfortable because I'm not in the position to say, let's ignore that one, or we'll focus in on this one, or we'll ignore that one and move on that one. It's really a hard place to be. So the more we can be specific would be helpful.
I'm shaking my head too, because I agree with all of you. I have both the parents' perspective, of course, and then law enforcement as well. It's very good.
Ron, can I piggyback on something?
Absolutely, Sheriff.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I kept trying to talk, but I kept muting myself. I think what we're hearing here is what we're all dealing with. And as the sheriff here in Worcester County, transparency obviously is first and foremost. But when we're getting these threats, there's really no way to control the animal of social media. I mean, we start getting the information, and then my team starts rapidly investigating it in conjunction with the schools, and we want to put out a uniform message across the board. But I think once the kids start texting and sending things out to their parents, what we find is it just gets so blown out of proportion. There's a gun in the school. They hear that there were shots fired when it wasn't even anything to do, with a firearm. There are so many different moving pieces to this. So I think this is a very good conversation that we're having, and what we're seeing across the state, we're all dealing, with the same thing. So maybe as far as the guidance and the protocols and moving forward, maybe we can start looking at, is there any way that we can do the best we can to contain the animal of social media as we craft this language? And I guess that's also contingent upon us to meet with our communities regularly and to put out information that we take your child's safety first and foremost. We're going to do what we can to mitigate threats, to eliminate threats, but they have to trust us and you as the school board and the schools to work together to keep their kids safe.
Right. I agree. It's almost as if, and maybe this is what the overarching reaches of the Maryland Center for School Safety is, that there is, 7 protocol steps that you take. And regardless of what the threat is, this is what you follow. And, once you do 1, 2, and 3, then, you communicate to the parents that the threat has been, determined that it's, not viable or whatever. But I mean, I agree with Dr. Martin. I mean, even if they write something on a bathroom wall, we take it as serious because you don't know anymore. And that's, that's what we're all fighting. So maybe, and I don't know if all of the school systems and if everything follows the same protocol, and maybe it's set up differently based on, who your lead law enforcement agency is. But at least if there is some type of, bare minimum that we are expected to do, and if that's documented by the Maryland Center for School Safety, then we have that to fall back on, especially for some of the smaller systems that don't have far-reaching staff that they could develop something like this. I think they all do it, but it might be better to have it written in the event that something comes up, and that then you have credence to it. So
what if we keep it simple? What if we look at any threats that are learned or identified by schools or law enforcement are immediately shared? That information is shared to the school. If it's learned through law enforcement, it's shared to the school as quickly as possible, and vice versa. That's the first protocol. And from there, it starts an investigation. Whether it's being investigated mutually as a school and law enforcement, local law enforcement, to determine the credibility of that threat. And from there, protocols are put into place at the school to determine what's going to happen based on that collaborative sharing of information back and forth between law enforcement, to determine what that response is going to be from the school. I think putting out something as quickly as possible from the school to the parents through social media gets ahead of it as well. So if that threat comes in, we received a threat, we're notifying parents that threat's being investigated by local law enforcement and the school system. And at this point in time, no change has been made at the school. We'll keep you updated. And we just kind of keep it simple and clean, and you're transparent and you're as upfront as you can be, to get ahead of the social media problem that you talked about, Ms. Bailey, that we all know about. But that just kind of keeps it real simple, real clean, that we take all threats seriously, and we determine whether they're real or not based upon that threat coming in and that proper investigation. And at no point are we putting students and staff in danger. We are going to make the right call based on the information that we have.
Ron, I think you also need to make sure that what we're really doing is giving guidance to school districts on how they could, like, maybe here are some important elements to a statement, like the chief was just talking about, but you're going to be like, our process might look different than other districts' process, based in part on our policy and regulations, how we build our threat assessment teams and what our threat assessment process is, right? And so I think we want to make sure that it's not going to be one statement that applies to all districts. I mean, that's just not how we roll in Maryland. So I think it could be like, put out an initial immediate statement through social media about we are enacting our process, and maybe we have some basic information about how those teams collaborate, law enforcement and school. But like in Anne Arundel County, I would want us to say, we use this threat assessment process, which is a board policy and regulations, letters JN and JNRA, which you can find on the website. Like, we have all of that laid out. So I think, like, for us, we would just want to be referring people to there and reminding them that, like, yes, we have this coordinated effort. If you want to understand our threat assessment process, here's where you go to learn about that. And that's going to look different for Howard County, for
Correct.
Washington County, you know, all those kinds of things. So I think it's really not about like making one thing that's going to work for all of us, but saying like, here are the key points, and you plug in as a district what is applicable in your particular district.
Right. Right. I was going to say, and Chief, you pointed out, I mean, that the basic steps are what they are, and everybody goes within that framework and has a whole lot of other protocols, to use Karen's words, but they're their own set of protocols based on their own policy. That's how we roll here. So that's, you know, and you also have the advantage of, you know, you have the ear of the parents where we don't necessarily at our level have that. So communicating, this has been mentioned too, about how you communicate the process in advance so that people know if you hear about something like this, this is how we handle it. Then they know in advance that maybe to look for some communication from all of you. I look through thousands of tips every year, and something like recently is in Baltimore County with Towson High School, there was it blew up, right? There was going to be a shooter, there's a gun coming into school, and everybody saw it. And we kept getting tips saying, I'm just sending this in because, and here's a screenshot, because I just wanted to make sure someone's aware of it. Well, the quicker you get that first message out saying, we're aware of it and we're looking into this, don't, you know, and we have your child's best interest at heart in our decision process, then that kind of cuts off at least some of that. Like, we don't even know if the school system does. So
I think even a generic, I think that message can be across the board for all the jurisdictions, but at a very high generic level.
Right,
You know,
right.
we take it seriously. We're letting you know as soon as we can let you know that we've received this information. We'll let you know that we received it and that we're investigating it based on the protocols within the school system, as Kelly said, you know, how it's being handled at each jurisdiction. And that will update you as soon as we have information to relay, and that we're taking the safety of our kids and our staff very seriously, and you know, bear with us on that. So I mean, I think just keep it simple.
Yeah, I'm thinking about the swatting document we put out. I don't know if any of you have seen that yet. It came out Friday. I don't know if I can share on Zoom with it. If I can attach something or not. Let me see. No, can't do it. But we'll have it out. We'll try to get it out to all the board. Make sure. But it's when I'm thinking about something like Chief, what you mentioned, or Kelly, what you mentioned too about, you know, each has their own process. Just simply something like it was a one-pager, described what swatting was, and how school systems generally respond to that, and what it, you know, what the potential hazards are as well. That was tossed in. Kim Buckeye from MSD, who's now with MCSS, now with us, helped put that together. Maybe we could take a look at something like that when we get around to one of the last questions is going to be what kind of next steps? Well, how do we get there from here, kind of thing.
But isn't Ron, if I may, isn't part of this recommendation that we develop an graphic to explain the process?
Yes.
That guidance. I mean, I agree with what both Kelly and the Chief are saying, but I believe that there is guidance that has some consistency, just the wording around lockdowns and shelter in place and things such as that. Are those consistent definitions statewide? It's my understanding they are.
Statewide. That's a great question.
I don't believe they are.
They're not yet.
Some people have lockdown, some people have lockdown with options, some people have secure in place. They're not consistent across, and maybe if we could get there, then this whole process would be easier.
I mean, we've developed all of those with the guidance from what we thought were from emergency management and the lockdown, modified lockdown, shelter in place. I mean, all the wording of which we all consistently use, I believe. But I think therein lies some of the confusion. You know, if we're trying to look for an infographic, I'm looking for words that help me understand the process and explain it to parents as we're determining credibility. And then we immediately go into a modified lockdown if it has any semblance of credibility. And we've had to redefine those terms for our community through our own communications. But I'm going also back to what Ms. Bailey has talked about, with some school systems have a more robust staffing that allows for more communication. So we've got to think of our school systems that don't have that as well. So if we're developing an graphic around this procedure and process, it's got to be at a high level, and it's got to eliminate or address some of the concerns that I think we're expressing in this, because it's a highly anxious period of time, those of us who've dealt with these on a regular basis. But Chief, the way you even worded those communications that go back and forth between the school system and the law enforcement is important for parents to hear, that we're just not making these decisions in isolation. But it's always a hard leap for me. The initial event occurs, and then the leap to then credibility, that space between there is always an uncomfortable place to begin to live in, because all the rumors are coming from social media and texting and all of that.
Trust me, we feel the same way. That's that uncertainty is never a comfortable place to be. But back to your point about the definitions, I think from this committee, we could identify what those definitions should be statewide, and then, you know, encourage all the jurisdictions to move to those same definitions. But in the meantime, if they're gonna, until that move is made or it actually gets pushed to be made, to use the language that they're familiar with in their jurisdiction that means the same thing to them. Because really it comes down to that the protocols are going to be followed generally the same. The language might be a little different until everyone gets on board. So I think to put out as our committee, we want to put out that this is what we want. We want these definitions across the board for all the jurisdictions to use. And here's how it should be formatted in that protocol and guidance.
Okay. That's a good point. Britt is reminding me, we need to move along real quick. That's why she's so valuable. One of many reasons. So step number 3 here is clearly state the concern that's being addressed. So what evidence exists to determine the extent and prevalence of the concern? I think that's fairly obvious. We've just been discussing that. But I'd like to hear your thoughts on that as well. Is this concern national one, state one, or just regional or local? Does the concern exist across all age groups and communities, or more prevalent in any particular population? And is the concern one of perception or reality, and how do you know? Anyone want to comment on any of those? I know in terms of swatting, I would say it's national. I mean, we've been seeing guidance from FBI and a number of other, obviously, national organizations about it. So how about some of these other threats? You think they're all that's pretty much the same boat?
I mean, the first point, what evidence exists, I already started by saying since the beginning of the year until Thanksgiving, I've had 42 threats. So its extent and prevalence is it dominates all of our existence every day, quite frankly.
And I also second on that one. I'm sorry.
No, Sheriff, go ahead.
Yeah, with what Dr. Martirano just said, you know, I just made a comment to my command staff this morning. I think that our children are growing up in a society where, unfortunately, you know, the terms active assailant and school shooter are unfortunately common language. And we here in Worcester County are almost dealing on a daily basis with the middle level school ranges making threats of stabbing and shooting. And just as of yesterday, we've had a kid in one of our middle schools going up to kids going stabby, stabby. And that's all he's saying. So all of these threats have to be taken serious. We find ourselves doing 2 to 3 threat assessments per week. So, and I guess I'm only sharing just some of what we're hearing. And I'm sure, again, a lot of it is statewide, but it's embedded in their culture. They're hearing about it every day. And it's unfortunate that it's almost like common theme for a lot of juveniles to talk about. And they don't really have the capacity to understand, or a lot of them do not have the capacity to understand that words matter. And that's what we're dealing with here. We're seeing it on social media as far as Snapchat. You know, we're seeing it swatting, Ron, which you said is nationally. But again, a lot of this is being vocalized by children to other children, elementary and middle school level, as early as that.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're seeing mostly in the high school level here, but definitely in the middle school level. A lot of what we're seeing here this year has been the filming of school fights that occur, and then the threats that come out of that fight from the social media side, where they're threatening retaliation, not necessarily in the school, but maybe in the community, and before and after school type thing. So we've been dealing with a lot of that here the last few months, especially at the high school level. Yeah, I agree with the sheriff. It's social media has been the biggest problem. We all know that. I'm talking obvious here, and I don't have an easy answer in terms of the evidence is when that threat's made, and it's got to be a threat that's specific enough to either specific students at a school or to the school itself. And the swatting is more of a national issue. We have had a few here in the past that we knew were local, but I know the ones here this past year, 12 months, have been more of a national one that's going around. So, but that's some of the things we've been seeing here is the school fights and the filming, and then the threats come out of that.
Okay. Heard from a number of some of my regional folks that said, look, they're usually beefs in the community that wind up spilling into the school. So that's just almost it's the same, but it's just the reverse in how the process works. Starts in the community and it ends up in the school. So, and I see some heads nodding, so I know that's happened. That's almost universal too.
Ron, not to go back to an earlier point, but I think we do really probably need to define threats against schools, because what are we talking about? Are we talking about when Johnny threatens to stab Joey, or are we talking about when Johnny threatens to come in and blow up the school? There's a broader, like, which is the part that's on social media that's really getting the attention? Is it the individual or the like small group interpersonal conflicts, or is it these threats against schools broadly? So all parents are worried that like there's going to be a mass violence act next week or whatever. Like, I think that's part of just what we have to define.
I don't think it matters to parents anymore. If they see that Johnny's threatening Joey with a gun, and they go to school together, their parents seeing that as a school threat, that their kids are going to be caught in a crossfire or something bad's going to happen. I think in today's world that doesn't matter anymore when that threat comes down to being individualized or directed at a school as broad, like a bomb threat. So
it matters a little bit though in how you handle it, because you can't put Johnny and Joey information out as part of a public statement, right? So like you have to be a little bit careful about some of that when you're really looking at like how we're handling it. So I agree, like I think they're all worrisome, but I think you're also going to get into some HIPAA, some FERPA, some various issues around, when it's like Joey threatening Johnny, if that makes it onto social media, we still can't necessarily tell you that we investigated Johnny and it was fine, right? Like that's a confidentiality issue. So I think maybe that piece of it also needs to be in our guidance, the issue around student privacy.
Yeah, the history we've had here is when we've had those things, we just put out that we're investigating a threat that's been made that involves a specific school or students that are involved in that school. We don't go into any kind of names or any kind of identifiers for just those reasons you talked about. And again, I think getting ahead of it, that students that we're investigating information we've received on social media involving potential students at school A, and that we've taken steps to secure and make sure the staff in school is secure during this investigation. That kind of thing. It's just a way to get around specific to those students and identifying who they are. The social media's already identified them probably, but we're not going to promote that anymore by identifying those students by name.
And I think we also are sort of saying that we want it to be when it's out on social media, not that we're the ones putting it initially out on social media, right? So if Johnny and Joey are having a conflict and nobody is talking about it on social media, we're certainly not putting it on social media. I think that also has to be a little bit clear. It's like, when it got to social media, here's how you respond versus, hopefully not every threat that you have in your school is being put out on social media by someone else.
Those are good points. We had, well, to use what I used from the Magruder incident that happened earlier this year, that was targeted violence, one student against another, but it became what it turned into was a threat against the entire school based on what the school didn't know at the time, and what occurred during the response. So, I get your point, Chief. I think that is partially correct. I think once, if parents know there's a gun going to be in the school, it doesn't matter if it's just a personal thing, it's still there. And so that means it's a threat to everybody. It's kind of become that. Although I think, I know initially when we started collecting threats, and it's part of our mandate under the Safe to Learn Act, we do capture those in numbers. It's specifically threats against schools. So I had to clarify with a lot of folks gathering data. I said, it's a threat against the school as a whole. It's not, I'm going to go kick Johnny's butt tomorrow. It is, I'm going to do something to the school, to, everybody. So that's how, just to push this definition on it, what are we going to say? I mean, what do you think? And this is, of course, part of this discussion as well, is what do you think is a good working definition of threat for the purposes of this guidance?
Wow, yeah. Is that a literal question?
Yeah, because I think we need to kind of come up with that and toss that out for the rest of the group at the end of this.
Right. I mean, that can involve all kinds of definitions for that.
It would help us, I think, too, in terms of what data we try to collect as well, right? So, but if you have any thoughts on when you think of this, when we thought of this recommendation, we were thinking of a threat as this. Yeah, you're right. It can be almost anything, depending on who's hearing it, right?
Well, I'm gonna ask Dr. Martirano, what kind of threat dictates a school response to a lockdown? All those things, you start thinking about what those threats are. If it's Johnny's gonna kick Joey's butt in school, that is a threat that's individualized. It's gonna be handled at the school level at a much smaller scale than Johnny's bringing a gun and is learned that there was a feud with Joey in the community on over the weekend. That threat's different. Or there's a threat that someone's going to come in and start shooting up the school. So I mean, I think looking at the threat level, it's a little hard to define. I'm back to that, but I'm trying to ask the question from the school staff that's on, how do you guys look at what threats are you guys going to take steps that are much more robust than just making notification to us for us to look into or to have just school staff deal with at the beginning of school day? Are you going to catch Joey and Johnny at the front doors that come in on Monday because there's a threat that one's going to beat the other one up, and that's how you handle it? Or if when I'm supposed to be bringing a gun, what steps are you taking? Are you going to have law enforcement engage with one of those students as they're coming in if they can't be found before school starts? So it's that level of what reaction is going to happen.
Yeah, so I mean, you ask a direct question as I'm sort of playing in my mind about that as I think about summarizing. Like a threat for me is any indirect or direct information that could cause harm psychologically, physically, mentally to students and staff contained within a school. I mean, that's how I think of that. That's extremely broad. It can be psychological, it can be physical, it is direct and indirect. It does not necessarily, and I could add more to it, but I think of it more broadly in that sense. And then kind of going to another level, when we were talking about examples such as swatting and fights on being recorded, I look at the social media threats, I look at the phone calls that come in, and each one of those defines a different level of response. But a threat for me is broad, that this does not always contain someone saying, I'm going to shoot you. There's a variety of other things that occur as well, or cause physical harm with a weapon. I have to include the other areas as well.
So do we define threat with what we're talking about here as a broader to the broader school body than localized to an individual? Is that how we want to define it? That affects more than one person? That threat, whether direct or indirect, has an impact on multiple people in the school, or can have impact on multiple people in the school, students and staff? Is that how we want to define threats for what we're talking about here?
So the concern is that, and going back to, let me pull this back up again. The concern is that, there's unrealistic expectations about what educators police can do. And, to develop some guidance, investigation, response to school threats. So social media threats, against schools. So that concern is based upon the response that you've seen from the community when they hear about these things, right? Which things generate the concern itself? Which types of threats? Johnny's going to go kick Jim's butt, or I'm bringing a gun to school tomorrow because I'm just pissed at the world. Which ones generate the concern? And then I think we need to kind of focus the definition based on the concern. Does that help at all?
And I think to your point though, Chief, it's like, whatever the concern is that got brought up so that now it's on social media, that's really like, it might be an interpersonal one, or it might be a blowing up the school one, but it's really when it hits social media and parents are reacting and kids are reacting, and sort of hysteria is being, or anxiety is being driven up as a result. It's almost like the fact that it's on social media is the part where we're trying to tackle, not necessarily even exactly what kind of threat it is, because it could go either way, right? It could be either one might prompt a social media response by parents.
Yeah, that example of Johnny wanting to beat up Joey in school gets morphed into Johnny's bringing a gun to Johnny's friends are now going to show up and there's going to be, a shootout at school, which came through rumor and nothing else. So it blows up into that from the social media side. So I agree with you. But I think from the definition, what we're talking about, social media threats or posts have to be specific to the broader school population, and not just an individual. Johnny wants to beat up Joey is not something we're taking in terms of this, what we're talking about, the guidance to respond. Because again, we're back to what we talked about in the very beginning, getting ahead of the social media side of that. So once we know that threat is of violence, of anything that can cause any kind of mass violence, or trauma that comes from that, whether it's emotional or whatever, should be put out to the schools. So I think identifying more of a mass threat, or potential of mass threat, than just two people wanting to fight.
Well, and I think we also have to differentiate, like, what's the concern? Threats that are put on social media. So when Johnny takes a picture of his new gun that he got, is that the threat? Or is it threats that we hear about that then get talked about on social media, right? Like, and maybe it's both things, but there are threats that are posted on social media, and then there's sort of a social media response when they hear about threats, and maybe those are two different things, or one exacerbates the other, maybe.
I think there has to be two different things. I mean, I agree. I think there's the one threat of you have, a centralized fight or whatever at the school. And I think that is handled differently. My impression of what the advisory board is looking for is, if you all remember last year, like just before Christmas, there were all of those like social media threats that were coming out against different schools across the country, right? I mean, we got hit at each of our high schools on, successive days. And it came to be that some kid in Texas was just, throwing stuff out, threatening, different places across the country, very vague. I think that's what we're looking at. So when we get something like that, then that's when we put the protocol in place, right? We contact the sheriff's department, the state police. This is how we investigate. In our case, we had the FBI involved, and then there was a press release that came out from the sheriff's office at the end about, that it was non-credible. So, and, because if you have, so that I think that's one piece of it, right? Like these mass things that are coming across the country, because you saw it filter, coming from the West Coast the whole way across the East Coast last year. Then you have the other piece that is your individual threats, as Kelly's been talking about, where you have 2 kids, and if it escalates to the level that it does get on social media, then you have your protocol in place. This is what we do. We go and do a knock and talk. We try and intercept the kids ahead of time, X, Y, and Z. I think there might be 2 different pieces to this rather than trying to put everything into one bubble. Does that make sense? Yes, no?
I mean, the points that you make are that there's so many moving pieces and each one presents differently. And we just can't have one blanket statement. So, I mean, I'd have to go down through the exact same way of which you're defining it, because each one of them is different, but commonalities. And
Okay, thank you. We're going to move to our next step here because we're running a little short of time, but no fear, we'll get there. Basically just asking, I want you to brainstorm a little bit for me on some solutions, on some, solutions and strategies to address the identified concern, which was, right, those social media threats, and then the response to them. So no idea is a bad idea. And please, if someone else throws out something you agree with, let me know that, because we're going to try to whittle this down right before we jump to the other group. And we've already talked about a few of them, but let's put them together for our note taker here so she can jot them down.
Ron, I think one of the things we talked about was a basic protocol, a protocol with some basic broad steps that could be given to districts as a recommendation when they have to respond to something from a social media, either a threat online or whatever, something like we're saying, here's how we respond to the public when this concern has been raised through a social media forum. I think that's one of the things that we're saying that we would like to generate. And I think then we're also saying we want it to be an infographic form potentially as well.
That was in the initial guidance.
it says to explain the process from the identification of the threat through the investigation and resolution. So the follow-up steps as well.
Right.
And that I think is really specific to your district because it's specific to your threat assessment protocol, right? And so maybe that's something that we just give guidance to districts about how to use their specific threat assessment protocol and provide information to families. And maybe that's the infographic. I don't know if that's what people are looking for in terms of the infographic.
Well, there are some generic terms.
What's your threat assessment?
So like we have a model policy and every school system has their own behavioral threat assessment policy that is supposed to be based off that model policy. That's getting ready to come out again, a revised, updated version very shortly. We can probably make that into an infographic, which should coincide roughly with most of the protocols in place in local school systems. Can't guarantee that exactly, but it may or may not serve the purpose. But is there another policy that you would think that you would suggest? I've seen some from Secret Service. I've seen some from.
I've got it muted. It's
George
okay.
Mason University. I've seen
unless I pipe
you know,
in.
some other Dr. Dewey Cornell has one. There's all kinds of them out there. But any suggestions on where we locate this or how we put it together so it's would fit almost any of your protocols?
I mean, I think using, that updated model policy recommendation is getting a little bit hung up actually on terms because the Dewey model uses transient and substantive as its way of thinking about threats versus low, medium, high. We've kind of combined them through the years and that kind of a thing. So I think you know, if we were to do an infographic, it would need to be using probably a combination of terms because different districts use different terms. We very much use transient and substantive.
Okay.
Other people use credibility levels or various things, you know, so unfortunately, I don't know that there is, even within that model policy, like single terms, everybody uses them across the board. I think Montgomery County uses different terms than Anne Arundel. I'm not sure what Howard County, Mike, if you can share what terms they use in terms of that, you know, but like, again, I think it's like one of those things, we're all doing sort of the same process, but we might have different terminology. And I would certainly want anything we put out to Anne Arundel parents to reflect the policy and regulations that we have as part of our process, you know?
Hey, Ron.
Go ahead, Dino. You're a little,
I'm sorry.
difficult.
I'm
There we go.
I'm a little, I guess, salad bowl mixed here. I know we're supposed to be looking at threats and guidance for threats, and I'm also hearing about behavioral threat assessments also.
It's 5 minutes now.
I think there's been a mixture of terms, at least in my head, that is mixing both of them together until you decide you have a credible threat and somebody behind that that's local. We can't do a behavioral threat assessment. So are we looking at just the generalized threats against the school first? Is my question.
Ron,
And
you're
I s-
muted.
Yeah.
Hit the wrong button. Sorry. So to go real back, we're developing guidance on criminal and administrative investigation response to social media threats against schools, right? This should include the development of a public infographic to explain the process from identification of a threat through the investigation resolution. So threat assessment is, kind of intertwined in that. That's how we kind of got down that road.
Okay, because there's a threat assessment, which is what will be happening during this type of event. And then there's a behavioral threat assessment. I think we've mixed the two, is what I'm hearing. And I just want people to be cognizant of the fact that you may identify somebody in the school who is the perpetrator of the threat during that threat assessment, and that route would have to be then, the behavioral threat assessment would take place then. We need step A before we get to step B. That's just my old country way of thinking, that's all.
I think we're being redirected back to the main meeting. I want to say one final thing. I think we need to define our audience, and I hope our audience would be our parents regarding this, because when we're talking about the infographic, and so that changes our outlook as far as what we say and how we say it. But I believe our community wants confidence that they know that when a threat occurs, that their children are safe and that we have a process and protocols in place to address it. So let's keep in mind that I'm defining this as our audience being our parents. If others have a different outlook, I'd like to hear that.
Anyone have another audience in mind? I'm kind of with you, Doctor, but
I completely agree. And I think it should be very simple. The school system either receives a threat or they've been notified of a threat through, a law enforcement agency. And then this is the protocol we put in place. We investigate in conjunction with the lead police agency in our county, and, updates will be provided. I don't think we talk about, when we lock down or when we don't, because to Kelly's point, every LEA has a different process. And looking at it on the back end after the threat is finished, I don't want to say that I didn't follow a guidance or a policy that, then comes up in a lawsuit somewhere because, it said we were going to lock the school down and we didn't lock the school down, and, or whatever. So I
was making some notes as we were going through this last part, and to follow along with Karen's, threats received into the school system, either directly or indirectly through law enforcement or other means, communications to local law enforcement to start investigation, notification has been made to the community if necessary, the parents basically, and then you're informing the community that the safety of school and staff is paramount, and you're working with law enforcement to determine a response to the threat, and then any actions taken as a result of the threats based on intelligence and investigation with local law enforcement. So those actions you're talking about, whether it's lockdown or whatever it is based on this overall intelligence is the and the investigation. So it's the bigger picture to know that's what we're making our responses to, and then do a conclusion when it's finally realized that it was not a threat, it wasn't viable, it was whatever, without violating any other legal issues with the kids, that charges were filed against a student or whatever that is, that we can put that message out without naming the student.
Did you get all that, Britt?
Yeah, the 15 seconds.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, in the 10 seconds left, Chief, you may have to repeat that. But we're gonna jump off. We have to go. So we'll see you back at the main room, which is of course everybody. So thank you.
So just to give you an overview of what we'll be doing, and I'll have to repeat this if anybody else jumps in late. So the goal of today is we're going to focus in on the recommendation 9.1, and I will throw the recommendation and the observation and the recommendation in the chat, just so you all remember. Just separate this so you can see it easier. All right, can you see it okay in the chat?
Mm-hmm.
All right, so we're going to be focusing in on observation 9 and recommendation 9.1. So we're going to have sort of a targeted conversation about these recommendations or about this particular recommendation. Claire and Coach Bell, I know you both have known each other over the advisory board for a period of time, so I'll forego introductions unless you both feel the need to introduce yourselves again to each other.
Hi.
All right. So the second thing I'll need, and unfortunately there's only 2 of you, is a volunteer that when we get back to the main board to brief out to the main board on the discussion that occurred in your work group. So on a positive note for the person who does brief out, is we have the pleasure of having JN help us today. JN is going to be actually taking notes. So you are not going to have to try to remember everything that was discussed. He will be able to actually share his note screen when we get back to the main group to jog your memory on any of the conversations that took place. So Claire or Coach Bell, or should we do some other way to decide who wants to?
I'm good either way. I know, Claire, you've done a great job speaking in front of
Thank
group
you.
many times. And I think that's great on the resume, but I definitely don't mind if you want me to take this one. It's up to you.
It's up to you. I can do it. It doesn't matter to me.
You can also do it together if you like.
Let's do that.
Perfect.
That would be nice. Okay. So Jessica is saying, Jan, that we're not sharing the notes. I can't see I only see the
Oh yeah.
screen.
Yeah, I can share it. I wasn't sure if you're sharing now or wait till the later to share, but here we go.
I think it'll help if they can see the prompting questions.
Absolutely. Here.
Okay. So we're going to start out by focusing in on the observation and the recommendation first with what are the terms in either the observation or the recommendation that would benefit from being defined more. So obviously there is a potential to create, especially with some of the other recommendations, but even this one, there's a potential to create some confusion or misconceptions or assumptions. So thinking big picture of the entire audience that could benefit from these recommendations and this observation. For example, and I think I have technical support here. Are you giving me a microphone? They're going to give me another microphone. So I'm going to leave it to you all to have, and this is just a brainstorming session. So just looking at the observation and looking at the recommendations, which terms do you feel could benefit from being better defined or defined at all?
The first thing point out I'm looking here is when they say, I'm just trying to figure out how to, because it's direct and that's what we want. At the same time, anytime when we're direct, especially with the public, that can always go sideways a little bit. So I'm looking here, how to identify and address inaccurate information while balancing response efforts. As soon as you throw in inaccurate, I feel like that's a negative term. As soon because automatically persons, they're thinking it's their word versus our word, or their word versus my child word, or what comes from there. And I feel like that term inaccurate, it should be a different term we can use that I don't know, this makes it more appealing. Like it's not we're trying to identify and address inaccurate information. What we're trying to do is be progressive about information to inform the public of what's going on with the balancing response efforts.
I agree. I was going to say something similar. I think just making the statement overall in that middle section more positive in our wording is definitely important.
Yeah, I guess if we tap on that, the word dilute effective communication, it would turn that to a more positive word to I don't want to use the word progress again, but it seems like we want to progress positive communication, more efficient communication, maybe instead of effective, maybe instead of dilute, progressive, more efficient information to get across to the public.
So can you hear me both?
Yes.
Is it working now? Is that
Very
clear?
well. Yep.
Oh, excellent. Thank you, Aaron. Yes, now I have a fancy new mic. So don't worry so much right now about defining those terms. Just identify which terms in either the observation or the recommendation we would benefit from a better description or a change or a definition. So I'm hearing inaccurate information needs to be better defined. Is there another term or terms in either the observation, like for example, the one I had in my head was inflame tensions. Do we need to better define what that means?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
I agree. I think inaccurate information and inflame tensions are the two that I'm looking at that I think would need more of a definition. Other than that, I think everything else to me looks good. I think if we define those two, it'll make the statement come together.
Okay, excellent. So we've got inaccurate information and inflamed tensions. So under the recommendation itself, are there any terms or words in that or phrases in that would benefit from being better defined?
I think the one we talked about, the inaccurate information, and saying dilute effectiveness, they will sound like terms we're using to put a Band-Aid on something negative that already happened versus what we're actually trying to do is be, we're trying to be proactive and send a positive approach that, these things will happen and this is how we'll communicate them going forward.
So what about when it says develop education and guidance on how to quickly identify and address inaccurate information Well, balancing response efforts. Does that need to be better defined? What do they mean by, what do we mean by response efforts? And Coach Bell, I heard you say dilute effective communication strategies. Is it the entire phrase, or is it, I mean, we can define each of the individual terms in it, right, to see if that helps us clarify what that means. Did you talk about, I apologize when I was doing the technical change on the microphone. Did you discuss effective communication strategies?
Yeah, we talked about it a little bit.
That was something we mentioned with the dilute effective communication strategies and rewording that, but I think defining that as well is important, especially with the dilute effective. That wording there, I think, needs to be defined more.
All right, good. Anything else in there that seems unclear or could benefit from either being defined and or more clarification or revision?
Back to your question about response efforts, I think that will be better defined once the inaccurate information, once that term changes, the balancing response efforts will make more sense because they'll be coming off a more positive term.
So do you think if you better define inaccurate information, then that individuals outside this sort of school safety community will understand what response efforts means, or will there still need to be some clarification?
I think it'll be better. I think it should, because I'm looking in my mind thinking, if I'm reading this, what's the clickbait words that I'm going to pass on when I want to gossip? And the balance respond efforts right now with inaccurate information sounds like cover up. But then if we take inaccurate information, we kind of spin that a little bit more positive, and we say we're balancing while responding, while balancing response efforts. Now we're saying, yeah, we're trying to get this all out to the proper people at the proper time, without, breaking any rules or laws, stuff like that. And we're going to get you the information, but obviously we can't give you everything right now because we're not allowed to.
Okay. All right, good. So do you feel comfortable that if you focus in on inaccurate information, inflaming tensions, that the other two then, both response efforts and whatever we mean by effective communication strategies, is enough? Or it'll help clarify what those two other items are?
I think so. I think if we define what we're saying, it's gonna clear up what was attempted to be conveyed in those last few things, especially with communication strategies. If we address what inaccurate information is, that kind of puts us at a place where, okay, this is what inaccurate information is, and that's how we would get to the communication stage. So I think it's okay.
I agree.
All right, excellent. So Jan, if you want to scroll down, actually you can see, I think you can see it on here. So for the next section now we'll actually start talking about how to define those terms. So there's really nothing in this observation, this specific observation or recommendation that ties to any sort of statute or law or regulation. So my question to you all then is, starting with inaccurate information, what I'd like you to think about when you try to define this term is, what is inaccurate information? Who is it inaccurate to, right? Is it the general public? Is it internal communication? Who is sharing the information that is, in this case, inaccurate? Who's the receiver of that information? And then if inaccurate information is being shared, what are sources of reliable, accurate information? So, because I think if you can sort of think through all of that, and feel free to use online sources if you want to do some quick searches online of definitions or other, you can do that as well. I don't want to limit you to just sort of stuff that comes right to your head if you want to do a quick search too.
I was going to say right off the back, inaccurate information comes from time delayed information. The longer it waits for people to get the information, the more inaccurate it's going to get, because everybody wants to add their spin on the event that occurred. So time is one of the biggest factors. The faster we can get information out, whatever that information may be, the faster we get information out, the more that the public will trust that resource versus them hearing it from their friend, Twitter or Facebook or YouTube, because whoever gets information first, that's the person they're going to trust first.
For sure. And I think defining inaccurate information as misleading or false, especially keying into the word misleading, is a more positive connotation to the term we're trying to achieve. A student or a parent may share something that could potentially have a little bit of truth in it. It's just misleading, and then people interpret it in their own way and continue to spread that information. So I think definitely keying into that statement is important.
I also believe all information is positive. It just might not, it's your response from the information, your interpretation of information is what makes it negative. So any information that gets out, when we say, inaccurate information, almost we're saying any information that doesn't come from us, that's inaccurate. That's not what you listen to. But that's not what we're saying. What we're saying is there's a sequence of events that happen. We would like to tell you those sequence of events, but we have a process for us to get the information to you. But here is the start, and we will get to the body, we will get to the end result. But any information coming out there, we're not shooting down what you might have heard. What you're saying is that let's explain the event to you. So that's where I always think about when it comes to being positive about that word inaccurate. Trying to think with other definitions.
So is the sharing of inaccurate information intentional? And if it's intentional, is it intentional all the time? Or is there other opportunities or other instances when inaccurate information might be shared?
I don't think it's ever intentional. I think it's one of the things that's going to happen. Like, it's just part of the deal. Information, someone's going to spread something. Whether it's, you have an incident happen at school and someone shares a 30-second video of a 5-minute event, that 30 seconds is going to define that event until the whole video gets out. But the problem is, once the whole video gets out, people might be tired and not even care to see the whole video because they've already made their opinion of it. So it's, I think it's something that it's just part of the flow. It's going to happen.
I think the biggest thing to remember is people aren't intentionally spreading false information. It's, as Coach Bell said, it's a response to something that's occurring. People are seeking answers. So the reason this false information is being spread, especially in my experience that I've seen with school safety events, it's because people are seeking answers. The first thing they find, that's what they're going to cling on to, because they want to know what's happening. I know from my personal experience, that's what a lot of students do. It's what a lot of parents do. So I think that's something important to remember. And then also just defining the who. I think it's just the entire community that an event impacts, because everybody is, again, seeking those answers in response to an event that has occurred.
What about the word exaggerated information? I mean, it's not completely positive, but that's what we're really saying, is that you're going to get information out there, but you might be getting parts added to the story that weren't part of the event. Maybe feelings are projected by the person who told you. So I'm just looking to hear different words for inaccurate. Like exaggerated is I'm just trying to think, I'm hearing that, if I hear exaggerated, do I feel defensive?
So Coach Bell, something you said earlier, when you were talking about the videos. So it sounded to me when you mentioned the 15-second video versus the longer video, right? So just the portion of, so is inaccurate information, does it stem potentially from incomplete information? So would it benefit us to describe inaccurate information or even exaggerated information as incomplete?
Incomplete, or I'm looking here, inexact information.
Okay.
I definitely think that's a better way to describe it.
Yeah.
Based on the conversation we've been having, because we've kind of said people have an idea of what's going on, but they kind of add to it, and that's where our inaccurate information comes from. So I think that makes sense in replacing that.
So if you were now to either reword or restate either the observation, don't worry about inflamed tensions right now, just focus on the inaccurate information piece, in either the observation or again in the recommendation, is there a better way? So develop education and guidance on how to quickly identify and address Are we better saying rewording that, or are we okay saying something like to quickly identify and address inaccurate information, which is or could be, insert definition here?
I'd think I don't know. I'm thinking if we just took out inaccurate and made inexact information,
I think if we define that term, we're clarifying though what we mean by inaccurate information. So perhaps people won't have as much of a negative connotation with it.
And so when we think about defining it, so develop education and guidance on how to quickly identify and address inaccurate information, which is often incomplete, misinformed. I'm trying to think of other terms that.
Would incomplete be a better term than inaccurate? Incomplete information?
So I guess I'm envisioning a scenario where it's completely wrong. So it may be complete. It may be complete because it's completely wrong, right? So I would caution. I can imagine two scenarios, right, where there's inaccurate information that is completely wrong, that it is not been validated, right? There is think of the swatting incidents that are happening. There is an active shooter at the school right now. That is inaccurate versus a situation where something occurred at a school and the reports that are coming out are incomplete, so that the information is inaccurate. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I would emphasize that if we include that definition in what we mean after inaccurate information, it will clear up any negative connotation somebody may have with that term. So if we do include that piece of it could potentially be incomplete information or exaggerated or whatever other terms we choose to define it as, I think that would help clear it up. But I do definitely understand what you're saying.
Or could say something like unsupported. Because we do have to be careful, and I'm thinking about it as I'm listening. I don't want to use words that I don't want to use SAT words. You know, then we feel like we're talking at someone instead of talking with someone. And the moment you feel like you're talking at someone, they feel like they're on the defensive again. So yeah, I think we do need to define. I agree with that. But the only word I can think is basically unsupported information. But maybe inaccurate information that's unsupported by what we know at the time.
So are there additional words that you want to add on to expand the definition? So I heard inaccurate information is potentially incomplete, unexplained, inaccurate. Exaggerated was another word I heard.
Yeah, unexplained, that's a good one. Let me see here. Well, I'm trying to think, not making that, I don't want to make it too long, right? So the original phrase.
So going back to a couple of the questions I asked earlier, who is potentially sharing inaccurate information?
I think
Well,
that,
that's
yeah.
good.
The biggest stakeholder, I think, in this is definitely students, at least again, in my experience, when we've had school safety events occur, a lot of things are being spread through Snapchat, text messages. That's a big one. Parents also may be that way as well. If a student shares a piece of information that they think is true, and then a parent shares it on Facebook or communicates with other parents in the community, that's also one that happens as well.
So the one we're looking at this term is need to address and correct inaccurate information which has potential to inflame tensions, correct? That's the actual word we're looking at, the line we're looking at.
Yeah, I think it ties to both, Coach Bell.
Yeah.
So it's both the inaccurate information that's in the observation, but also in the recommendation. But yes.
So now that I'm looking at it again, that need to address part. If we say, if we take that and turn that to want to be proactive to correct inaccurate information, which has the potential to inflame intentions. Now it sounds like we're being more proactive. We still can have inaccurate information. We can define that. But when we say we want to be proactive in correcting inaccurate information, that sounds like we're not telling you what you need to hear. We're saying that, you know, we need to get on this. We need to get this information out to you as fast as possible. And then on the second part of the recommendation part where it says address inaccurate information, I think that's when we need to define the inaccurate information, like Claire said.
And so who's the receiver of the information, whether it's accurate or inaccurate?
Well, it's going to receiver is always going to be the public. I mean, that's what's going to come out there. Social media is going to, you know, get on that real quick. We had the incident at Great Mills, which was just a simple fighting the gym, and next thing we know, our SRO had got stabbed several times, and the whole school was going crazy, and someone, dropped a weapon, and it was all crazy just because we were handling stuff inside, but none of that stuff was even close to being true. And that's the information was getting back to us.
I think the important thing to remember as well is that it's not just potentially a school. If there's an event that occurs in the school, it's not only that community that's being impacted, but the schools around it as well. I can speak to several instances within my own county, and I know my co-position Henry can as well. When we've been in school and we hear an incident from another school and we get all sorts of information,
Oh yeah,
we're then concerned about our safety, and none of it is true. So that's another important thing, just remembering that even if an event occurs in a specific school, everybody around them is being impacted by information that's being shared.
Yeah, our students have discussed things that happen at Calvert high schools, and especially things that happen at Larentown down the street. I remember when the shooting happened at our school, I got a call from my brother who lives in St. Louis, asking about information. So the information gets out there quick because of social media. Everybody has that ties to it. That's the biggest thing is, Twitter, Facebook, all those, Instagram, which are set for short format information, and short format information is always going to get you in trouble because you're never going to get the full story because it's not big enough to put the full story on there. It's all clickbait.
All right, we did inaccurate information. The other was that you identified, and I'm sorry, Jan, can you scroll up to 2? Oh, you're on it, or 1, excuse me. So inflame tensions, do you want to talk about that one a little bit?
I mean, that's the outcome. Yeah, of all this is going to be the inflamed intentions and tensions. There's already a lack of trust and disbelief when some of these events come out anyway that we're going to be able to handle it properly. It's quick to, you think about your own children or your friends or siblings. If something happens to them, you're already questioning the doctor who's trying to take care of them, even though that person went to med school for like daggone 20 years. So that's always going to be the outcome, and it's par for the course. Sorry, Claire, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you're good. Yeah, I definitely agree. I think the biggest thing with tensions and the reason people get upset with misinformation that's being shared and then the delay of information coming out is that a lot of people, and myself included, don't always understand how long it takes to verify information and where it should be coming from. So I think in terms of inflaming tension, it's definitely that question of, well, where was that accurate information when I was seeking it? Is a big one, at least again, from my perspective and what I've heard from other students as well.
So that's a really good point. It's not specifically tied to the definitions, but definitely tied to the strategies and how to implement the recommendation. So how long, right? The length of time it takes to actually verify information so that the authorities, whoever that is, right, whether it's the school system or law enforcement or other responders, how long it takes them to validate and verify the information that they share. So keep that in mind when we get into, we won't get through all of these today. It'll be the next work group session. But that'll be something to bring up in that is how do we set expectations, right, on how long it takes to validate information, right? So, and what are strategies that schools and other authorities can use to prime the pump, right, to get the information started with maybe not having all of the information they're able to share right away. So that's excellent. Thank you, Claire. Is there anything else or any other need to expand on inflaming tensions or what that means.
The only thing I say about inflamed tension, sometimes it's not the incident that happened, it's already the relationship they have with the actual school itself. So if they already don't trust the school, it doesn't matter what happens, it's going to be inflamed tensions. Whereas if the school has shown a progressive approach with its community, as being basically a campus to its community, they have a lot of trust. When the school makes a statement, the community will believe the school will handle it.
That is an excellent point. I can't agree enough. And again, I feel like that's definitely something we should consider in inflamed tensions, because especially within my own county, a lot of people have negative connotations associated with BCPS's response to certain threats that have occurred. And so when things do go out, you'll see a lot of anger oftentimes in the comment section of their posts, and things that students are saying and things that the community is saying. So that's a really great point. I'd like to emphasize that as well.
And so tensions are already inflamed, and I'm hearing because of a lack of trust, pre-existing and or previous responses, or perceived lack of response to other similar situations. Okay. So building that trust ahead of time does what? Does it give them a little more, does it give more time potentially?
Absolutely gives more time. And, when we talk about getting information out, that means simple things are happening in your school, putting that information out, but the positive things that happen in your school. Now, when the negative thing does hit, you kind of got a little bit more money in the bank, and they know, okay, that school does a lot of good things. This is just a little hiccup. They'll handle it. Definitely buys a lot more time so they can actually investigate and get the proper information out to the proper authorities.
Good. So in the beginning, you said if we better defined inaccurate information, you wouldn't have to further explain response efforts. Do you think that's still true, given the conversation? Like what is response, and does it need to be better defined?
Probably like a timely response. That's the only thing I would say about it. The response is going to happen regardless. Yeah, it's going to happen regardless of what time. It's just the timely response. And if it's obviously you want to get to the end to answer all the questions, so to keep being asked the same question, but you're probably going to have to do several responses to a incident, just so that you can show that there is work in progress to a resolution or a solution to the event.
So when it was said balancing response efforts, what about a situation where the information that can be shared or communicated with the public is limited because of an investigation that's ongoing?
I think the biggest thing with that is just people get frustrated when there's a lack of information and it's not clarified why there is a lack of information. So perhaps stating that if it's through a county school system, if they're releasing a statement on social media, just saying more information forthcoming, we can't release this at this time, but if you have specific questions, direct them here, something along the lines of that. Mm-hmm. Just making sure that at least a statement gets out in a timely manner, because if they sit on it, then that's when all the information that isn't accurate starts to be spread. And then by the time they say, okay, well, we're investigating and we can't release this information with you, by that point, it's too late. There's too much information going around that it is difficult to combat.
I'll also say how they get that information out, how they respond, and who does the responding is very important. If they're just sending out an email first of all, not everybody's checking their email. Sometimes you want, if we're going to get the inaccurate information on social media, maybe we need to get the real information, real response on social media. So a quick thing on Twitter, or a quick thing on Instagram, a little 30-second blip on any kind of video of social media, like YouTube or something like that. And the person who is actually responding to the information could be, if they trust the principal, that's the person you would love to have the response. Or if there's someone designated to deal with community relations, maybe it's a career center person, maybe it's a counselor, whoever it is that deals with the community can trust that person is getting information out to them, because that figurehead is who they're going to look for and who they're going to, talk about when it comes to the accurate or inaccuracies of the information coming out.
Any response is better than no response at all, because if there isn't a response, people are still going to find out about it. They're still going to seek those answers, and then they're going to go to other sources. So regardless of if information can be shared or not, just releasing a statement saying, hey, we're working on this, we'll get information to you as soon as we can, is really important. And that also establishes trust within the community, because you have somebody who's being a proactive communicator and saying, we'll get this to you. We're working on it. So I think that's definitely important. If that information isn't shared, then people are going to seek it in other places.
So it sounds like what you were both saying ties to even the last one, the effective communication strategies, right? So what I heard was not just the speed, right? So that information gets out quickly, even if there is a lack of information to share, at least saying more information is coming. I think that's what, Claire, what you were saying. Coach Bell, I heard effective communication could also be sharing it over social media as well as other. So those are what I would consider non-formal platforms, but also formal mechanisms. So you had said communication from potentially the principal or another individual that the community trusts, sharing that information directly. Did I miss anything?
I don't think so.
So informal, formal information coming from a trusted source, from a individual that the community trusts, whether it's the school community and then the general public community. Anything else that would make an effective communication strategy or be effective?
I would just say keeping in mind which groups are using what. Like, I know students are going to turn to social media to get their information, and parents will too, but they might be checking their email to see if any information is coming from the school. A student isn't going to do that and isn't going to be receiving information that way. Just keeping in mind the different avenues groups are receiving information in, I think, is also an important factor.
Yeah, we as a school system, we got to be on top of how our students are communicating and how our parents are communicating. We keep using, I use the term Facebook. I don't have a Facebook page because I got rid of mine, and I feel so good about it. I'm not gonna lie, but that's, as students always tell me, that's an old person thing now. And even when I use the word Twitter is a mix. It's the Instagram. It's the rest of the social outlets. Yeah, we have to stay on top of how to reach our students, because if we show that we're progressive in our communication, the students are going to tune in. But if we show that we're outdated, they're like, this is cool. They ain't talking to us, they talking to the old people.
And clearly Snapchat, you're not going to be able to reach students through there because schools don't utilize that. But I think definitely emphasizing Instagram is where people are going for their information from school. Speaking from experience, students do not use Facebook, and you're right, there is a mix of people using Twitter. Instagram, I think, would be the sole focus for official accounts for school systems to get information to students specifically, just keeping in mind that that's the platform most students are looking at.
And so the big takeaway that I heard there from both of you is it's audience dependent. So if you're trying to reach the students, you need to use the communication mechanisms that students use. If you're trying to reach their parents, that mechanism might be different or look different. And then if you want to reach the general public, obviously that's going to look potentially completely different. Did we capture that? Good. Excellent. So anything else or any other term in here that is not clear or could benefit from more clarification in the original recommendation or observation, excuse me. So there is a, Coach Bell, was there a recommendation to change the beginning need to address and correct?
I'd say if we just took the need to address and made that, that would say about being progressive, instead of saying need to address, just kind of soften that term about being proactive. Need to be proactive in providing correct. No, I forgot what term I actually used. I don't know if it's written up there earlier. But the need to address part was the part I was looking at.
So there is a need for
I see earlier.
School communities to be proactive to correct and or potentially prevent inaccurate information.
Develop ways to be proactive in correcting inaccurate information.
Because I think the biggest takeaway from this discussion in what I'm hearing is just making sure that when an incident occurs, there's a plan in place to know what to do, what kind of communication needs to go out. So I think including the term proactive would be important in terms of this recommendation in solving this issue.
Kind of make it almost like a checklist. Incident happens, we have a checklist. If we do this, boom, knock it out. Even if the people in charge are not there, whoever is dealing with the incident can look at the checklist and like, oh, we hit all these spots, information's out.
Yeah, Jan, will you throw the checklist part under prompt 3? Because that'll be sort of the spitballing of ideas of how we do that. I think the checklist is a great idea. I think the other item to add under there, even though we're not there yet, is the knowing your audience, right? This section on who your audience is and what platform and or format you're going to share that information. I feel like there was another one. Also add under that guiding prompt 3, Claire had mentioned, that it can take time, but clarifying and or explaining sort of why it takes time, right? Providing some sort of guidance or information about why it might take time to get completely accurate information shared, but the drip campaign of at least giving them something so they know that something is happening. And we'll address that. We'll talk about those when we meet again. All right. Do both of you feel comfortable with what you have in briefing out the entire group? Do you want to decide which ones to split up? Do you want to have one of you brief out or both of you?
Yeah, we put a lot of stuff on there, didn't we?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I was looking, wow. It's up to you if you want to split it up, if there's something you feel more strongly about. I know you talked a lot about the specific wording of the question or of our recommendation, just making sure it had a more positive connotation. So maybe splitting it up that way.
Yeah, we can do that. you know me, I'm always good for the chiming in on the way it's perceived type of deal. So let's see here. I'm trying to look at. There's a lot of stuff. Like we're only talking for 5 minutes.
I know, and it's been almost an hour.
Yeah, yeah. That's good conversations though. That's good stuff right there.
Yeah, for sure.
So I will I could talk about the wording part, which is that the first part or the
Yeah, so Jan, could you scroll back up to 1 and 2? So don't worry about this section. We're not there yet. So it's really,
Okay.
the first part was which terms did you all decide needed better clarification? And the second half is how did you then redefine those or reword them or address them?
okay. So you want, Claire, you're saying you want to do the second half, I do the first half?
Yeah, it's up to you, whichever one you feel more strongly about.
Okay, but we can do that. That works for me.
All right, they're giving us a warning that we're going to be pushed back into the other room in just a minute. So at this point, Gifty, unless you all have anything specific you want to continue to discuss, I'll have Gifty stop the recording.
Good morning and welcome to today's School Safety Advisory Board meeting. It is 11 a.m. Therefore, I will call this meeting to order. Please confirm that the meeting once again is live streaming and recorded.
The meeting is live streaming and recorded.
Thank you. We will now begin with the roll call of our board members. Let's begin with that process if we could. Are we going to share the screen there?
Yes, I am. Just slight technical challenge. Give me half.
Okay.
Can you see it yet?
I cannot.
Slides are up, Kate.
Slides are up. Okay. And we are ready to go through the slides, correct? Are they up now? Okay, good. Once again, good morning. I'm Dr. Michael Martirano, Chair, and let's begin the roll call. Catherine Klausmeyer. Are you with us?
Oh, Senator's actually out of town right now. My name is Sam Dation. I'm her legislative director.
Thank you. Eric Ebersol, are you present? Moving on to the next slide. Karen Bailey, I know that you're here, but are you here?
I'm here. Yes, thank you.
Dr. Kelly Anderson.
Here.
Pamela Gaddy. Lourdes Padilla. Moving to the next slide. Andrew Tress. Laurel Moody.
Good morning here.
Thank you. Good morning. Claire Cabral.
Here.
Good morning, Claire.
Good morning.
Dr. Tia McKinnon.
Here.
Welcome, Dr. McKinnon.
Thank you.
Sheriff Matthew Crisafulli.
Here, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Chief Paul Kiefer.
Here, sir.
David Engel. Detective Lawrence E. Smith. Next slide, please. Dr. Sharon A. Hoover.
Present. Good morning.
Good morning. Megan Berger.
Present.
Good morning to you. Scott Tiffin. Michael Brown.
Present.
Thank you, Michael. Moving to the next slide. James T. Bell.
Present.
Mr. Bell, good morning.
Morning to you.
Patrick D. Herring. Thomas E. Alban.
Present.
Thank you. Good morning to you. Manfred Reek. Lee Nadine Oppenheim.
Present. Good morning.
Good morning. Next slide. I believe that is everyone. Can we please determine if we have a quorum?
We do have a quorum.
Thank you. Welcome, Mr. Dunklow. Is that you on that I heard?
It is, yes, and I'll be standing in for Dawn Ludke. She's moved out of state service, and so I'll be covering the board until a replacement counsel is hired.
Thank you and welcome. Once again, board members, it's good to see you, and although it albeit virtual. As you remember, the last meeting of the advisory board was in November, and the November meeting was recorded, and the recording is available on the MCSS website. As such, there are no meeting minutes to be approved. Let's move on to the agenda. Are there any additions to today's agenda? Hearing none, there are no additions to the agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
This is Tom, so moved.
Thank you, Tom. Do we have a second?
This is Sharon. Second.
Sharon, thank you. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? The motion passes. The agenda for today is approved. Now let us move into the next area on our agenda. I know if you had the same experience that we just had in our work group, we needed more time, and we had a very robust discussion. For the last hour, members of the board have been working in those three separate work groups discussing the three items. The meetings were recorded and will be made available following today's meeting. I will ask each designated work group lead to provide an update on their discussion and the work group's next steps. As we hear from each group, I encourage members of the board to ask questions and identify any concerns and provide any comments to each work group. Let's start with recommendation 3.1, identifying the behaviors of concern. Who was the lead in that particular group?
So Kim is the lead from MCSS, but I was asked to report out from the work group. Kim, did you need to make any contextualizing remarks?
No, I think we got through sort of 1 and 2. Dr. Hoover has some feedback she would like from the group. And then I'm also prepared to put in the chat box the one proposal you may speak to.
Great. So you can see there the recommendation, and our work group spent time first on just thinking about definitions, and a couple of areas we focused on specifically were within the recommendation and then the observation statement. So the observation statement includes language around creating a culture of civility in schools. So we spent some time attempting to define that. And then the actual recommendation includes the term behaviors of concern. And we had discussion around and there seemed to be consensus around adjusting that language because that language has specific meaning within the law, related to it essentially being kind of the precursor to a threat assessment. And we understood our charge or the recommendation to be broader than that. So we were kind of thinking of language that might reflect educational materials to support the stakeholders that are mentioned here on how to promote pro-social behaviors and decrease maladaptive behaviors. So one of the questions to the broader group was, are we collectively okay with the idea of replacing behaviors of concern with something akin to both promoting pro-social behaviors in school and decreasing maladaptive behaviors, recognizing that we would then need to define those as well. So those were the primary things that we spent our time on as a work group. And I invite others from the work group to chime in.
Thank you. I am curious, these resources should incorporate the student voice. How was that discussed?
So thank you. We did discuss that. There was both an interest in engaging young people in the actual discussion and really in the co-development process, but there was some uncertainty about how we could effectively do that within the process that's currently happening. So work groups during the school day, how can we ensure that we actually do have student voice? So we didn't land on a decision about how to do this. We just all seemed to come to consensus that it was very important to do.
Very good. I think that we need to remember that the individuals affected by this the most are our students and our staff, and how we think about ways to reduce anxiety as we are addressing these. I constantly hear from our student body about that. That's excellent. Anything else from your particular group that we'd like to lift up? It's a nice summary. Thank you very much. Let's move on to recommendation 6.1, threats and swatting. Who's going to represent that particular group? Ron?
We didn't actually decide that, but I was hoping one of the group might volunteer to talk about some of the things we discussed while we were together. So I'll take volunteers, since I know you all like to talk.
Chief Kiefer, I see you right on the screen. You're anxious to talk.
Thanks for letting me be voluntold on this one, Doctor. So our work group was working on their unrealistic expectations regarding what law enforcement and educators can do in response to social media threats or posts as the work group. So we had a lively discussion about the differences between all the jurisdictions and the responses, the definitions that different school systems use regarding things like lockdowns and those kind of terminologies as some barriers that we needed to kind of overcome within the work group. And what we really boiled it down to was coming up with, there was some discussion about guidance as being a problem word and maybe protocol being developed into there. So I think we didn't really define which way we wanted to go there, other than to kind of come up with a protocol that's broad across all school systems, whether small or large, that would work within the framework of that specific school district and how they handle school threats to the specifics of those school threats. So one of the things we looked at was getting ahead of that social media craze that goes out there when some of these things hit that platform, whether real or not. So putting a protocol out that basically says that once a school receives a threat, either directly or indirectly through law enforcement or other means, that they will instantly communicate with the local law enforcement agency responsible for that school safety, and an investigation will begin. Joint investigation partnering with that local law enforcement agency, and that a notification will go out to the community if necessary based on the threat, the level of that threat, and that notification will be to explain that that's what's happening, that they received a threat, that we are investigating it with local law enforcement, and that the safety of the students and the staff are paramount, and we're working to determine the response to this threat in conjunction with law enforcement. And then any actions taken as a result of that threat will be based on the intelligence and the investigation in cooperation with local law enforcement, to follow up with any kind of outcome from that, whether it's was deemed to be not valid, or if it was valid, if charges had been filed against anyone, without going into specifics who that student might be, if it's a student, and working through that to get ahead of. So the protocol is basically to try to get ahead of that social media fervor that we can't control as soon as possible, but that information just kind of going down a protocol. So I'll encourage anybody else from our group to step in and clarify anything that I've brought up.
That was excellent. Ms. Bailey, do you could you add some more information from the group regarding the audience of who we were talking to and the need for communications with our community?
Yeah, so we decided, or I guess toward the end, that our deliverable needs to be directed to the parents within the community. They're usually the ones that are fueling it on social media, or their children are, and there is just that, there's that angst of, what's happening in my child's school? Do I need to run and pick them up right now? So we are trying to make sure that whatever protocols or guidance we set out, that, that there's very clear step-off points for the parents to be notified or updated as to what is going on. I made the point, I don't know if the group agreed, but, maybe to not go so far as to determine, if X, Y, and Z happens, then we lock down, right? Because each case is going to be different, and we don't want to pigeonhole anything and kind of put ourselves into a box that, if we end up not locking down a school, then we have, follow-up questions later, just because the investigation is always going to be so fluid.
Yes, well said. Thank you. Anybody else from the particular group want to say anything? Still much work to be done. Good conversation. Let's move on to the next work group. Recommendation 9.1, inaccurate information. Who is identified as the spokesperson for this group?
We're both going to speak. I'll start off. The biggest thing we were looking at were trigger terms. When we look at things like need to address or inaccurate, dilute effective communication, inflamed tensions, we were looking at terms that as a public, if I'm reading those are the terms I'm kind of stuck on. And we need to do a better job defining those terms as far as making sure that they know that we're being more progressive instead of being, putting a Band-Aid on the situation. We want to be more progressive about getting the information out before in more of a timely fashion.
So such as the inclusion of a word such as proactive and defining inaccurate information as potentially being incomplete information. Just making sure that the wording we have is accessible to everyone and we're clearly conveying our point across in what we mean by inaccurate information and how we're effectively communicating with the community. But beyond that, we also discussed the specific groups that are being impacted: students, parents, staff, the community. I think a big thing we talked about was if an event occurs in a school, it's not just the school that's impacted, it's all the schools around it. It's the entire community. I know, speaking from experience as a student, something that happens potentially at a school in my county on the other side away from me, I'm hearing that information that potentially may be inaccurate. So just ensuring that the entire community is being addressed in this. Also remembering the audience, the students, the parents. We talked about how students are receiving a lot of their information through social media platforms such as Instagram, while as parents may be consistently checking their emails or using Facebook. So just keeping in mind when information is being shared and trying to make sure accurate information is being shared, those platforms and those differences are kept in mind. And then I think another thing we talked about as well was just making sure that if information cannot be shared at the time, so if there's an ongoing investigation, just communicating with a simple statement on social media or through email or through a trusted person in the community, just that there is an ongoing investigation, no information can be shared at this time, because we said something is better than nothing. People are still going to find out that something is occurring. So just ensuring there's some sort of proactive communication if an event occurs, regardless of if information can be shared or not, will help quell the spread of that misinformation.
Claire, that is extremely well said, and we've had those conversations at the local level. Just let people know something is happening is very important to our community as the evolution of the event occurs, so that we can continue that information. Did you speak specifically about ways that we could enhance our communications to students?
So I think we definitely specifically said just keeping in mind the platforms that students are using, such as Instagram being a primary one. We also talked about building trust in the community as well. If trust isn't established there first, then when communication does go out, students and parents and stakeholders may not trust that information that's occurring. So I think that's something we're going to continue to talk about in our discussions moving forward. But our initial conversation today was focused on that initial social media breach and where students are communicating, because that's definitely the main one where people are getting their information.
I appreciate. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, when we discuss inflamed tensions, sometimes that comes not from the incident that happened, but it might be from incidents that happened before. So we're talking about getting positive information out as well as negative information. If the only time the school hears from you is when something bad happens, then that's what they expect. So we want the school to trust that when we do put information out, that we will handle the information, we will handle the incident and resolve it in a timely fashion. You can trust that we're gonna take care of everybody, and that everybody's voice will be heard before we make a decision.
Thank you. Well said on both of those. And I like the fact the word that you chose to, both of you use, was trust. Individuals need to feel that trust. At the same time, did you spend any time identifying when we're talking about trust, how to quickly identify and address inaccurate information, about encouraging and empowering parents and students to proactively let us know things are happening as well? Did you have discussions around that? That may have been a little bit more broad.
I think that was something we touched on at the end. We kind of ran out of time because we were talking about all these great things. But again, I think that's something we're definitely going to work to address in our solutions and our further discussions around this recommendation.
Many of the school systems have adopted the philosophy of see something, say something, hear something, say something. Those pieces become critical in helping us identify clear and accurate and factual information. So thank you. Anybody else from group 9.1? Anything else you would like to say? Thank you.
It was just the two of us.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, that was very robust then. Thank you, but did a very nice job. Thank you very, very much. Sounds like all the groups had an extremely productive discussion, and we're looking forward to the ongoing work around these very important topics. And I can quickly see the interwoven themes between all three of them as we're working towards this common goal of addressing the concerns identified in the recommendations. Next week, the board will receive copies of all the work group notes with the purpose of allowing you the opportunity to provide any follow-up comments or thoughts you have on the recommendations. These comments will be shared with the work groups in preparation for our next meeting. Now, moving on with our agenda, I'm now looking at additional board updates. I will open up the meeting to any updates from the board on important projects, discussion items, or new resources that you would like to share with the group. Kate, I don't have access to seeing everybody on the screen, so I'm just going to ask board members, if you have something, please sort of jump in or raise your hand and we'll identify you there. Do I see anybody who would like to jump in and share some information with the board?
I don't see any hands.
Very quiet today, board members. Okay, well, thank you for your continued commitment to the safety of our schools and of our students. Let me just let you know a couple things as we foreshadow the future here. There is no meeting scheduled in January. The next subcabinet meeting will be held virtual on February 6th. So I wish you all a wonderful holiday season, to be safe. And at this moment, do I have a motion to adjourn?
This is Tom, so moved.
Thank you, Tom. Do we have a second?
This is Laurel, second.
Second. Oh, I'm sorry, Laurel. Sorry, Laurel.
You can have it.
Who was that? Of Laurel? Okay, we have a second from Laurel. Okay, we got that. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed to adjourning? Hearing no one, thank you. And as I stated, have a wonderful rest of the year. And one more shout out to the staff. You're doing an outstanding job. Thank you for all your support, everyone. Have a great day.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.